If you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. My name is William Foster. I'm a park ranger stationed in northwestern Michigan, near the Manistee National Forest. It's a place of beauty, but also isolation. Towering pine trees stretch over 100 feet tall, their shadows swallowing the ground below. In winter, the forest becomes something else entirely. A frozen wasteland where even the bravest souls hesitate to tread. The snow piles up high, and the winds howl like something alive. This winter was worse than most. A record-breaking blizzard had trapped the area for days. I wasn't always a ranger. Before this, I was a police detective in Detroit. But after a shooting incident that left a teenager dead, I couldn't stay there anymore. The guilt was too heavy and the city felt suffocating. So I left it all behind. My job, my marriage, even my son, and came here, hoping to find some peace. But peace is hard to come by when your past follows you everywhere. The forest has its own stories, though. The locals talk about strange things, legends, passed down by the native Odawa people who warn of territory not meant for man. They say there's something out here, something ancient and dangerous. Most people dismiss it as superstition or campfire tales, but I've seen enough in my life to know that not everything can be explained. This winter was different from any other I'd experienced. The forest felt wrong. The snow wasn't just cold. It was heavy, suffocating, like it wanted to bury everything beneath it forever. Lake Michigan's shoreline had frozen solid, creating ice caves that looked like something out of a nightmare. Fog rolled in thick and disorienting, making it impossible to tell where you were. And then there was the silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I'd heard about the Dogman before. Stories of a wolf-like creature that walks on two legs and appears every 7 years during the coldest part of winter. People claimed it had glowing blue eyes that could hypnotize you and a howl that could drive you mad. But I never believed in monsters. I believed in people, what they're capable of, good or bad. Still, something about this place made me uneasy. 3. Hikers had gone missing back in November before the blizzard hit. We searched for them for days but found nothing, not even tracks in the snow. Eventually, we had to call off the search because of the weather. The locals said it was the Dogman's doing, that it had returned after 7 years to claim its victims. I didn't believe them. But as I sat alone in my cabin one night, staring at the swirling snow outside my window, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Something was out there. The first strange thing I found was during a routine patrol. The snow had finally let up, and I decided to check the trails near the old logging camp. It was a place that hadn't been used since the 1930s, with cabins that were falling apart and tools rusting where they'd been left decades ago. The forest had reclaimed most of it, but it was still a popular spot for hikers, at least before the blizzard. I was walking along the trail when I saw them, deer carcasses. At first, I thought they'd been killed by wolves, but as I got closer, I realized something wasn't right. The deer weren't lying down like you'd expect. They were standing upright, frozen in place. Their bodies were stiff, covered in frost and arranged in a perfect circle. Their eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. I don't scare easily, but seeing that made my stomach turn. It wasn't natural. Animals don't do that. Not wolves, not bears, nothing I've ever seen before. I took a few pictures with my camera and marked the location on my map. I told myself it was probably some kind of freak weather event or maybe even a prank by some kids, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. A few days later, I found something else. A campsite near the edge of the forest. The tents were shredded, ripped apart from the inside out. There was no blood, no sign of struggle, just torn fabric and scattered belongings. A backpack lay half buried in the snow, its contents spilling out. Clothes, a flashlight, a water bottle. Everything looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry. I radioed it in to my supervisor, but with the weather still bad and no new missing persons reports, there wasn't much we could do. "Probably just animals," he said. "Couple of wolves got curious and tore the place up. But animals don't shred tents like that, not from the inside." As I walked back to my truck that day, I noticed tracks in the snow. Large prints. That looked like they belonged to a wolf. But these weren't normal wolf tracks. They were spaced too far apart, like whatever made them was walking upright instead of on all fours. The tracks appeared suddenly and disappeared just as quickly, as if whatever made them had vanished into thin air. That night, a hunter came by my cabin. He was an older guy named Frank who lived nearby and knew the forest better than anyone. He handed me an old leather-bound journal and said he'd found it in one of the abandoned cabins near the logging camp. "You need to read this," he said. "It's about whatever's out there." The journal was filled with shaky handwriting and sketches of something that looked like a wolf standing on two legs. The entries talked about hearing howling at night and seeing glowing blue eyes in the darkness. One page described an encounter where the writer claimed the creature had followed him for miles, staying just out of sight. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe it. But everything in that journal matched what I'd seen. The tracks, the shredded tents, even the deer carcasses. Things got worse after that. My radio started picking up strange noises, children's laughter mixed with howling, and no one else was supposed to be in range. Trees near my cabin had claw marks at human height, deep gouges that couldn't have been made by any animal native to Michigan. I tried to tell myself it was just paranoia, that being alone out here for so long was messing with my head. But every time I stepped outside, I felt it. Something watching me from the shadows. Something waiting. By mid-January, the snow was relentless. Another hiker had gone missing, a young man named Eric who'd been out exploring the forest alone. His family reported him missing when he didn't come home, and I knew we couldn't wait for the storm to clear. Time was running out. I organized a search party with 3 volunteers, Jackson, Martinez, and Wilson. Jackson was a local hunter, tough and experienced. Martinez worked at the nearby lodge and knew the trails well. Wilson was younger, maybe in his 20s, eager to help, but clearly nervous about the whole thing. I didn't blame him. We set out, early in the morning, bundled up against the cold. The snow was knee-deep in some places, and the wind cut through us like knives. It wasn't long before we realized how dangerous this was. The blizzard wasn't letting up, and visibility was terrible. But we kept going, following what little tracks we could find. The deeper we went into the forest, the stranger things became. We found more claw marks on trees, deeper than any I'd seen before. Jackson pointed out that they were too high up. For a wolf or bear, whatever made them had to be standing upright. Then there were the sounds. At first, it was just the wind whistling through the trees, but soon we started hearing faint howls in the distance. They echoed so much that it was impossible to figure out where they were coming from. Sometimes it sounded close, other times it seemed miles away. Wilson kept glancing over his shoulder like he expected something to jump out at us. "Are you sure this is safe?" he asked. "It's not," I said honestly, "but we don't have a choice." By late afternoon, the storm had gotten so bad that we couldn't keep going. We decided to take shelter in one of the old cabins from the abandoned logging camp. It wasn't much, just 4 walls and a roof, but it was better than freezing to death outside. The cabin smelled like damp wood and decay. The windows were frosted over and snow had piled up against the door. Inside, we found old furniture, covered in dust and stacks of yellowed newspapers from decades ago. Most of them were about logging operations shutting down, but one caught my eye. It was dated January 1987 and talked about strange disappearances in the area. "That's 7 years ago," Martinez said quietly when I showed her. "And 7 years before that," I added. remembering what locals had told me about Dogman sightings happening in cycles. Jackson found carvings on the cabin's foundation, symbols that looked Native American in origin. He said they were meant to ward off evil spirits, but whatever they were supposed to protect against clearly hadn't worked. As night fell, the tension grew thicker than the storm outside. We heard scratching at the windows and doors, soft at first, then louder and more frantic. Martinez swore she saw movement outside through one of the frosted windows but refused to say what it was. Then came the voices. At first, it sounded like someone crying, a child's voice begging to be let inside. "Please," it said over and over again. "It's so cold." Wilson jumped up and ran to the door before I stopped him. "Don't open it," I said firmly. "But what if someone's out there?" he argued. "There's no one out there," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. The voices changed after that, mimicking people we knew. Martinez froze when she heard her mother's voice calling her name from outside. Jackson swore he heard his wife laughing like she used to before she passed away last year. I didn't hear anyone specific, not my son or anyone else, but I felt something pulling at me all the same, like it wanted me to open that door more than anything else in the world. We barricaded ourselves inside as best as we could, pushing furniture against doors and windows. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be enough. Something wanted us trapped here. Something wanted us afraid. The scratching didn't stop. It came in waves, sometimes soft, like a gentle tap, and other times loud enough to make the walls shudder. The voices outside grew more desperate, more convincing. Martinez sat in the corner, clutching her knees, rocking back and forth. She wouldn't look at any of us. Jackson paced near the door, gripping his hunting knife so tightly his knuckles turned white. "We can't just sit here," he muttered. "Whatever's out there is playing with us." Wilson was worse off. He was shaking, mumbling to himself. "It's safer out there," he said suddenly, standing up. "I'm going outside." "No," I shouted, grabbing his arm before he could reach the door. "You're not going anywhere." He fought me, screaming something about how we were all going to die if we stayed inside. I managed to restrain him, but he wasn't the same after that. He sat quietly for a while, staring at the floor, before pulling my knife from its sheath and ending it himself. I didn't even have time to process what had happened before Jackson snapped. "They're not human," he hissed, pointing at Martinez, and me. His eyes were wild, his face twisted in anger, or maybe fear. "You brought us here to die." He lunged at Martinez with his knife, but she was faster. She grabbed an old axe that had been left in the cabin and swung it at him. The blade hit him square in the chest and he collapsed onto the floor. Martinez dropped the axe and backed away, shaking uncontrollably. I didn't mean to." I tried to calm her down, but before I could say anything we heard it, the sound of something heavy climbing onto the roof. The ceiling creaked under its weight as snow fell through cracks in the wood. Then came a loud crash as part of the roof caved in. Something dropped into the cabin, a shadow too big to be human. It stood there for a moment, towering over us, a creature straight out of nightmares. Its fur was black as coal, its body muscular, and hunched like a predator ready to strike. But it wasn't its size or shape that froze me in place. It was its eyes, glowing blue. They locked onto mine, and I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. My mind felt like it was being pulled apart, filled with images that didn't make sense. Faces I didn't recognize, places I'd never been, screams that weren't mine but felt like they were. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed by those eyes, but Martinez snapped me out of it with a scream. She tried to run toward the back room of the cabin, but the creature moved faster than anything I'd ever seen. It didn't kill her, not right away. It wanted her afraid first. I grabbed my shotgun and fired at it point blank. The blast echoed through the cabin, but when the smoke cleared, the creature was still standing there, unharmed. Bullets didn't work. It turned toward me then, its blue eyes burning into mine again as it stepped closer. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the gun. I knew we couldn't fight it, not with weapons, but there was one thing left I could do. I grabbed an old oil lamp from one of the shelves and smashed it on the floor near the creature's feet. Flames erupted instantly, spreading across the wooden floorboards and catching onto everything around us. The cabin filled with smoke as fire consumed it from within. The creature howled, a sound so loud and deep it felt like my chest might explode. But it didn't follow me as I ran toward the root cellar beneath the cabin. Martinez's screams echoed behind me as I climbed down into darkness. I never saw her again. I don't know how long I stayed in that root cellar. Hours, maybe. The fire above me roared, and the air grew thick with smoke and heat. I kept expecting the creature to come crashing through the floorboards, but it never did. Eventually, the sounds faded. The howling, the cracking of wood, even Martinez's screams. All that was left was silence. When I finally climbed out, the cabin was gone, reduced to a pile of smoldering ash buried under fresh snow. The storm had covered everything, erasing any sign of what had happened. There were no claw marks, no footprints, no bodies, just me standing alone in the middle of that frozen wasteland. I made my way back to my truck, half frozen and barely able to think straight. I drove to the ranger station and filed a report, but I couldn't tell them the truth. Not all of it. Who would believe me? Instead, I said there'd been an accident, that carbon monoxide from an old stove had caused hallucinations and led to the deaths of Jackson and Wilson. Martinez was listed as missing, presumed dead. They put me on administrative leave after that. Said I needed a psychological evaluation before returning to duty. Maybe they were right. I wasn't sure what was real anymore, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. The creature, those glowing blue eyes, the way it seemed to feed on fear rather than flesh. It wasn't just an animal. It was something else entirely. Something ancient. I started researching Dogman sightings across Michigan. Old reports from hunters, hikers, even police officers who'd seen things they couldn't explain. The stories were all similar. Glowing eyes, inhuman speed, mimicry of voices. And every 7 years, like clockwork, it returned. The signs didn't stop either. Even after I left the forest and moved back home, I started noticing strange things. Around my house, dead animals arranged in perfect circles in my backyard, claw marks on trees near the property line. My radio would pick up faint howls late at night when no one else was around. Then there was my son. He came to live with me after his mother called one night in tears, saying something had been watching their house, something she couldn't describe, but knew wasn't human. He didn't talk much about it, but I could tell he was scared. I tried to protect him, to keep him safe, but deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before it found us again. My last journal entry was dated January 2001, the start of another 7-year cycle. My son and I decided to go camping that week in hopes of facing whatever was out there head-on. If it wanted us, we weren't going to hide anymore. We never came back. The first Dogman sighting of 2001 happened exactly 1 week later. A hunter reported seeing glowing blue eyes near Lake Michigan's shoreline. The cycle continues. My name is Thomas Miller, and I'm a park ranger here in Loveland, Ohio. I've been working this job for almost 5 years now, ever since I moved out here to escape the noise of the city, and the noise in my head. You see, I served in the Korean War, and I came back with more than just scars on my body. The memories of what happened over there, they don't leave you. They follow you, like shadows. I live alone in a small cabin near Loveland Creek. It's quiet out here, peaceful most of the time. My only company is Duke, my German shepherd. He's more than just a dog to me. He's my partner, my protector, and sometimes my only friend. He's been trained to sense danger, and let me tell you, He saved me more times than I can count. Loveland Creek is beautiful in its own way. The forest surrounding it is thick with ancient sycamores and willows that form a canopy over the water. On warm spring evenings, mist rises from the creek like something out of a dream. The sound of spring peepers fills the air. It's peaceful but also eerie if you listen closely enough. There's something about this place that feels old, like it's seen things that no one else has. The locals have their stories about Loveland Creek. Some talk about strange creatures they've seen near the water late at night, humanoid figures with glowing eyes. Others blame it on superstition or too much whiskey. There are even old Native American legends about water demons that live in the creek and take people who wander too close. Most folks laugh it off as nonsense, but I've always believed there's truth in every story. Things have been strange around here lately. Last fall, we had heavy flooding that uncovered some old caves near the abandoned Miami-Erie Canal lock. Since then, people have been disappearing. 3 hikers vanished just last month. The official explanation is drowning accidents, but something doesn't sit right with me about that. And then there's the chemical plant upstream that's been dumping who knows what into the water for years. Some fishermen swear they've seen fish with extra fins or glowing scales. The local paper ran a story about it once, but quickly dropped it after pressure from higher-ups. I try to keep my head down and do my job, but lately, I've been feeling like something isn't right out here, like there's something watching me when I'm out on patrol at night. Duke feels it too. He gets restless near the creek, growling at shadows that aren't there. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm going to find out. It started with footprints. I was out on my usual patrol one morning, walking along the edge of Loveland Creek. The sun was just coming up, and the mist was still hanging low over the water. Duke was trotting ahead of me, sniffing at the ground like he always does. That's when I saw them. Strange tracks in the mud near the creek bank. They weren't like anything I'd seen before. 3 toes, webbed, and much bigger than any animal I knew lived around here. I crouched down to get a closer look, and Duke came over, sniffing at them. His ears went back, and he let out a low growl. That's not like him. He doesn't react that way unless something's wrong. I tried to brush it off as some kind of large bird or maybe even a prank, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. I took a photo with my old camera and marked the spot in my notebook. A few days later, some fishermen came into town talking about strange things they'd heard near the creek. They said they were out late one night when they heard voices calling their names from the water. At first, they thought it was someone playing tricks on them, but when they looked around, there was no one there. Just the sound of their names, being whispered over and over again. I didn't know what to make of it. People tell stories all the time, especially around places like this. But then I found something else. Something I couldn't explain away. It was during another patrol, this time deeper in the woods near the creek. Duke started acting strange again, sniffing at the air and whining softly. That's when I saw it. A deer lying in the grass, dead. But it wasn't just dead. It had been mutilated. Its organs were missing, but there wasn't a single mark on its body that looked like an animal attack. It was precise, almost surgical. I felt a chill run down my spine as I stood there staring at it. Duke wouldn't go near it. He stayed back, his tail tucked between his legs. That night, things got worse. I was out on a night patrol near the creek when I started hearing strange sounds, croaking noises coming from all around me. At first, I thought it was just frogs, or toads. This area is full of them during springtime. But these sounds were different. They were louder, deeper, and seemed to follow me as I walked. Then my radio started acting up. It crackled and hissed before picking up what sounded like voices, but they were garbled and backwards, like someone speaking in reverse. I tried adjusting the frequency, but nothing worked. Duke stayed close to me that night, his fur bristling every time we got near the water. By now, I knew something was wrong, something beyond what I could explain with logic or science. But still, I told myself it had to be animals, or maybe even someone trying. To scare me? Anything but what my gut was starting to tell me. Things started to spiral after that. Duke's behavior changed. He'd always been fearless, but now, whenever we got close to the creek, he'd stop dead in his tracks. His ears would go flat, and he'd whine, refusing to move forward. One time, I tried to coax him closer, but he barked sharply at me, almost like he was warning me. That's when I knew whatever was out there wasn't just in my head. Duke could feel it too. Then found the shoe. It was during another patrol near the creek bank. The water was low that day, and I spotted something half buried in the mud. When I pulled it out, I realized it was a child's shoe, small, worn, and coated in a strange, slimy residue. The slime smelled awful, like rotting fish mixed with chemicals. It burned my skin slightly when I touched it, leaving a faint red mark on my fingers. I reported the shoe to the sheriff's office, but they didn't seem too concerned. Probably washed down from upstream, they said. Kids lose stuff all the time. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected to the hikers who disappeared last month, or maybe even something worse. Around this time, local. Teenagers started talking about seeing frog people near the creek at night. They claimed they saw humanoid figures with greenish skin and glowing yellow eyes watching them from the water. Of course, no one took them seriously. Not their parents, not the police, not even me at first. Kids make up stories all the time, especially when they're bored. But then came the night at my cabin. I was sitting inside reading an old book when Duke started barking furiously at the window. His bark wasn't his usual warning. It was frantic, almost panicked. I grabbed my flashlight and went to check outside. That's when I heard it. The croaking sounds again. But this time, they weren't distant or faint. They were loud and close, surrounding my cabin like a chorus of frogs gone mad. My heart started pounding as I shone my flashlight into the darkness. The windows were covered in slime, thick and dripping, and Duke was growling so fiercely that his teeth were bared. I didn't see anything outside that night, just shadows moving between the trees, but I didn't sleep a wink after that either. The croaking eventually faded away, but Duke stayed restless until morning. The next day, while cleaning up the slime from my windows, I found something stuck to the glass. A small piece of what looked like leathery green-gray skin. It felt unnatural. In my hands, almost alien. That night I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. The footprints, the voices, the mutilated deer, the shoe, and now this. It all felt connected somehow. Like pieces of a puzzle that I didn't want to solve but couldn't ignore. I started digging through old records at the ranger station and found something chilling. A newspaper clipping from 1939 describing sightings of strange amphibian-like creatures near Loveland Creek. The article mentioned glowing eyes and croaking sounds similar to what I'd been hearing. It also mentioned disappearances, people vanishing without a trace near the water. I sat there staring at the article for what felt like hours before finally closing my notebook and heading home. Whatever was happening out here wasn't new. It had been going on for decades, and now it was happening again. It all came to a head one night not long after the incident at my cabin. Duke and I were out on patrol again. I didn't want to go near the creek, but something was pulling me there, like an itch I couldn't scratch. Duke was hesitant, staying close to my side, his ears twitching at every little sound. The air felt heavier than usual, thick with humidity, and something else I couldn't quite name. Even the frogs and crickets were quieter than normal. We were walking near the old canal lock, a place that always gave me the creeps. It had been abandoned for years, just a crumbling structure covered in moss and vines. Locals said it was haunted, but I'd never believed in ghosts. Now, though, I wasn't so sure what to believe anymore. Duke suddenly froze, his nose pointed toward the ground. He sniffed once, twice, then let out a low growl. His hackles were up, and his whole body was tense, like a coiled spring ready to snap. I followed his gaze and saw it. Another set of those strange three-toed footprints in the mud. But this time, there were more of them. A lot more. They led straight into the canal lock. I hesitated for a moment before pulling out my flashlight and stepping inside. The air was damp and cold, and the smell hit me immediately. A mix of wet earth and something rotten. Duke stayed close behind, me, his growls growing louder with every step. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a pile of debris, sticks and mud piled together in a corner of the lock. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't debris at all. It was some kind of nest, a large structure made of branches, leaves, and what looked like bits of clothing and personal items. My stomach turned as I spotted a watch, a tattered backpack, and even what looked like an old pair of glasses tangled in the mess. Duke barked sharply, snapping me out of my thoughts. That's when I noticed the movement, 3 figures standing in the shadows at the far end of the lock. They stepped forward slowly, their glowing yellow eyes cutting through the darkness like headlights. They were humanoid, but not human. Tall and thin with leathery green-gray skin that glistened in the light of my flashlight. Their heads were large and frog-like with wide mouths that seemed to twitch as they stared at me. One of them held something in its hand, a long stick or wand that crackled with faint blue sparks. For a moment, I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of lead, and my mind was screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't listen. The creatures began to croak, a deep, melodic sound that echoed off the walls of the lock. It wasn't random. It sounded almost like language. Then one of them raised its glowing eyes to meet mine. It was like being hit by a wave. My entire body went numb and my vision blurred as if I were underwater. My flashlight slipped from my hand and clattered to the ground. Somewhere in the back of my mind I could hear Duke barking furiously, but it sounded distant, like he was miles away. Just when I thought I was done for, Duke lunged forward with a snarl and bit down hard on the arm of the creature closest to us. The thing let out a high-pitched screech that snapped me out of whatever trance I was in. I stumbled backward as Duke wrestled with the creature, his teeth tearing into its slimy skin. I grabbed my revolver with shaking hands and fired at one of the other creatures. The shot echoed through the lock like thunder, and blue, phosphorescent blood sprayed across the walls as the creature staggered back with a guttural croak. The wounded one let out an ear-splitting shriek that made my ears ring. And then, everything went silent for half a second before more croaking erupted from outside the lock. They weren't alone. The croaking outside the lock grew louder, and I realized what it meant. More of them were coming. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Duke was still locked in a vicious struggle with the creature he'd attacked, but before I could help him, 2 more figures leapt into the lock from the shadows outside. I didn't wait to see what they would do. I grabbed Duke by his collar and pulled him away, shouting for him to run. He hesitated for a split second, growling at the creatures, but then he followed me as we bolted out of the lock and into the forest. The creatures didn't let up. They were fast, faster than anything I'd ever seen, and they moved with an unnatural grace in the water and on land. Their glowing eyes cut through the darkness like searchlights, and their croaking sounds seemed to echo from every direction. It was like they were surrounding us, herding us deeper into the woods. Duke was ahead of me, barking furiously as we ran. I could hear the sound of splashing water behind us as the creatures gave chase, their webbed feet slapping against the ground. Every time I glanced back, I saw those glowing eyes getting closer. I tripped over a root and hit the ground hard, my revolver slipping from my hand. Before I could reach for it, one of the creatures lunged at me, its wand crackling with blue sparks. I rolled to the side just in time to avoid being hit, but the thing's glowing eyes locked onto mine again, and I felt that same wave of paralysis wash over me. Duke came out of nowhere, snarling and biting at the creature's leg. The thing let out a screech and turned its attention to him instead. I scrambled to my feet and grabbed my revolver, firing 2 shots into its chest. It collapsed with a wet thud, its phosphorescent blood glowing faintly in the darkness. But there were more coming, too many for me to fight off. I knew we couldn't outrun them forever. They were faster than us, stronger than us, and they knew this forest better than we did. My mind raced as I tried to think of a way out. That's when I remembered the gasoline canister in my Jeep parked near the trailhead. "Come on!" I shouted to Duke as we ran toward the Jeep. The creatures were still behind us, their croaking growing louder and more frantic as they closed in. When we reached the Jeep, I grabbed the canister and started pouring gasoline in a wide arc around us. Duke barked at the approaching creatures, his teeth bared as he stood guard by my side. The first creature lunged at us just as I struck a match and threw it onto the gasoline. The fire erupted instantly, roaring to life and spreading quickly through the brush. The creature that had lunged at us was caught in the flames and let out a deafening screech before exploding in a burst of blue light. The others stopped short at the edge of the fire, their glowing eyes flickering as they watched helplessly. From behind the flames, I didn't wait to see what they would do next. I grabbed Duke and jumped into the Jeep, starting it up and tearing down the trail as fast as I could go. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away from the creek. My hands were shaking, and my heart was racing like I'd just run a marathon. Duke sat in the passenger seat, panting heavily, his fur matted with mud and blood. I kept glancing at him, silently thanking him for saving me back there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't escaped. Not really. When I finally felt safe enough to stop, I pulled over and checked Duke for injuries. He seemed okay, but he was exhausted, his eyes drooping as he rested his head on my lap. I sat there in the Jeep for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of what had happened. The creatures, the glowing eyes, the nest, it all felt like something out of a nightmare. The next morning, I reported everything to my supervisor in the sheriff's office. They listened politely, but didn't believe me. "You've been under a lot of stress lately," they said. "Maybe it's your war memories playing tricks on you." They chalked it up to PTSD and told me to take some time off, but I knew what I saw. A search party was sent out to investigate the creek and the canal lock. They found nothing. No footprints, no slime, no nest. Even the area where I'd set the creatures on fire was clean, as if nothing had ever happened there. All they found was Duke's collar lying near the water. I refused to leave Loveland. My supervisors tried to transfer me to another park, but I wouldn't go. This place had taken so much from me already. I wasn't going to let it take anything else. Instead, I built a small memorial for Duke by the creek, a simple wooden cross with his name carved into it. Every spring night when the mist rises from the water, I swear I can hear him barking in the distance. The disappearances started again 10 years later, in 1967. Children went missing near Loveland Creek, just like before. The locals whispered about the frogmen again, but no one dared go looking for them. I kept a journal of everything that happened during those years. Every sighting, every sound, every strange occurrence near the creek. That journal became the foundation for what people now call the legend of the Loveland Frogman. Some folks treat it like a ghost story. Others swear it's real. My final entry in that journal reads, "They're patient, they can wait, but they never forget a face." My name is Elaine Yazzie, and I'm a park ranger stationed in one of the loneliest places in northern Arizona, a place called Skinwalker Ridge. It's not the kind of place you'd find on postcards or travel brochures. The land here feels old, like it's been watching people for centuries. The mesas rise like ancient giants, their shadows stretching across the dry earth even at noon. Twisted juniper trees dot the landscape, their gnarled branches forming shapes that sometimes look like faces if you stare too long. I grew up not far from here on the Navajo reservation, but for a long time I stayed away. I went to college in Tucson, got my degree in wildlife biology, and thought I'd never come back. Life out there felt easier, modern, clean, and far away from the whispers of old stories my grandmother used to tell me. Stories about skinwalkers. But something pulled me back here. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe just curiosity about my heritage. I don't know. What I do know is that Skinwalker Ridge isn't just another park. There's something about this place that feels wrong. The air gets colder than it should at night, even in summer. Mist creeps in without warning, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. And then there's the abandoned trading post from the 1920s that serves as our ranger station. Now, it's falling apart. Cracked windows, creaky floors, but it's all we've got out here. I've been stationed here for almost 2 years now, and I've seen things I can't explain. Animals acting strange, shadows moving where there shouldn't be any, and hikers who swear they hear voices calling their names from the cliffs. Most people chalk it up to superstition or exhaustion from the heat, but I'm not so sure anymore. There's one thing I never take off while working here: my grandmother's turquoise pendant. She gave it to me when I was little and told me it would keep me safe. Back then, I thought it was just a pretty necklace, but now I think she might have known something I didn't. I've been secretly researching disappearances in this area for a book I'm writing. Hikers who vanished, without a trace. Strange symbols carved into rocks near old trails, and rumors of military testing back in the 1950s that no one seems to want to talk about. The deeper I dig into this place's history, the more questions I have. And tonight feels different. It started with the coyote. I was driving my truck along one of the dirt trails near the ridge, checking for signs of erosion after last week's storm. The sun was just starting to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. That's when I saw it. Something lying in the middle of the trail. At first, I thought it was just roadkill. Coyotes aren't uncommon out here, especially near dusk. But as I got closer, I realized this wasn't normal. The coyote's body was laid out perfectly, like someone had arranged it on purpose. Its legs were stretched straight, its head tilted, back unnaturally, and its organs. They were missing, not scattered or torn apart like a predator might do, just gone. I parked the truck and stepped out, my boots crunching against the gravel. The air felt heavier than usual, like a storm was, coming even though the sky was clear. I crouched down to get a better look and noticed something else. Symbols drawn in the dirt around the body. They weren't random shapes. They looked deliberate, almost like writing. I don't know why, but my grandmother's voice popped into my head right then. She used to warn me about things like this, things that didn't belong in our world. If you see something strange, she'd say, don't touch it, don't go near it. But I couldn't help myself. I took a picture with my camera and backed away slowly, trying to shake off the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. When I got back in the truck and turned the key, nothing happened. The engine didn't even make a sound. I tried again and again, but it was dead. Completely dead. I glanced at the ridge in the distance, its jagged outline cutting across the darkening sky. There was an old burial site nearby, a place my grandmother always told me to avoid, but it was too far to walk back to the station before nightfall. I didn't have much of a choice. I grabbed my pack from the truck bed and started heading toward the site to camp for the night. By the time I reached it, the sun had disappeared completely, leaving only a faint glow on the horizon. The burial site wasn't much, just a cluster of rocks arranged in circles with faded carvings on them, but being there made my skin crawl. I set up camp quickly, lighting a small fire to keep warm as the temperature dropped faster than usual. The mist rolled in soon after, thick and disorienting, making everything outside my campfire look blurry and unreal. That's when I noticed them, the carvings on some nearby trees. They weren't old like the ones on the rocks. These were fresh, as if someone had carved them recently with a knife or sharp stone. They looked similar to the symbols around the coyote's body, but more elaborate, almost like they were meant to mean something specific. My grandmother's warnings came back again. Symbols are messages. They're not meant for you. I tried to ignore them and focus on keeping my fire going, but every crackle of wood made me jump. The mist seemed to shift around me like it was alive, curling closer whenever I wasn't looking. And then, I heard it, a voice calling my name. Elaine. It sounded exactly like my mother's voice, soft and familiar, but there was no way she could be here. She lived hours away from Skinwalker Ridge and hadn't visited me since I started working here. Elaine. Help me. The voice came from somewhere deep in the mist, near a ravine that cut through part of the ridge. My heart started pounding as I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward where the sound came from. "Mom," I called out, even though I knew it couldn't be her. No answer, just silence. I stayed frozen for what felt like forever before forcing myself back toward the firelight. Whatever that was, it wasn't my mom. The fire crackled softly, but it didn't feel comforting anymore. The warmth didn't reach me. My hands were shaking as I sat there staring into the mist. I kept telling myself it was just the wind, or maybe my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. That voice, it wasn't natural. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little sound made me jump. The rustle of leaves, the snap of a branch somewhere in the dark. I kept my flashlight close and my grandmother's pendant even closer, clutching it like it was the only thing keeping me safe. By the time morning came, I felt like I'd aged 10 years. The mist had cleared, and the sun was rising over the ridge, but the unease hadn't left me. I packed up my camp quickly and decided to hike back to the ranger station on foot. The truck could wait. I just needed to get out of there. About halfway back, my radio crackled to life. "Yazzie, you there?" It was Peterson, one of the other rangers stationed with me. His voice was calm, steady, completely normal. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "Truck broke down last night. I'm on foot." "Figures," he said with a chuckle. "Listen, I'm heading up toward the ridge. Got a report of some strange lights up there last night. Probably just campers messing around." I froze mid-step. "Lights? What kind of lights?" "Don't know yet," he replied. "I'll check it out and let you know if it's anything worth worrying about." "Be careful," I said quickly, but he'd already signed off. I wanted to tell him about what I'd seen. The coyote, the symbols, the voice. But something stopped me. Peterson wasn't Navajo. He didn't grow up hearing the stories, and he probably wouldn't believe me anyway. By the time I reached the station later that afternoon, Peterson still hadn't checked in. That wasn't like him. He was usually good about keeping in touch during patrols. I tried calling him on the radio again and again, but all I got was static. As the sun started to set again, worry turned into fear. I decided to head up toward the ridge myself to look for him. The trail was rough, winding through sharp rocks and patches of scrub brush that snagged at my clothes. The higher I climbed, the colder it got, and by the time I reached the top, my breath was coming out in white puffs. That's when I found it. Peterson's uniform was lying on the ground near an old juniper tree. His shirt, pants, boots, all neatly arranged like he'd just stepped out of them and disappeared into thin air. But there were no footprints leading away from them, just his own tracks leading to this spot and stopping dead. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me as I crouched down to pick up his radio from where it had fallen nearby. It was still on, crackling, faintly with static. "Peterson?" I said into it, my voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then I heard it, chanting. Low and rhythmic, like a drumbeat made of voices instead of instruments. It sent chills down my spine as I stood there frozen in place. The chanting grew louder for a few seconds before cutting off abruptly with a burst of static that made me drop the radio in shock. I didn't wait around after that. I ran back down the trail as fast as my legs would carry me, not stopping until I reached the station and locked myself inside. That night, as I sat alone in the dim light of the station's lanterns, something even stranger happened. I went outside briefly to grab some firewood from a pile near the back door, and when I turned around to head back inside, I saw them. footprints circling my campfire from last night. They were mine. But here's the thing. I hadn't walked in circles around my campfire at all. Not once. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Someone, or something, had been following me all along, copying me, watching me. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the footprints. How could they be mine? I hadn't walked in circles around the fire. It felt like something was mocking me, copying me, and I didn't know why. I locked the station door and sat at the desk, staring at Peterson's empty uniform folded neatly in the corner. The radio was silent now. No chanting, no static, just dead air. I tried to convince myself that maybe he'd wandered off, maybe he'd gotten lost. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I opened my journal and started writing everything down. The coyote, the symbols, the voice calling my name, Peterson's disappearance. My hands were shaking as I wrote, but it felt like the only way to keep myself grounded. Then something strange happened. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke up to find my journal open to a page I hadn't written. The words were scrawled in a shaky hand. They are watching. My heart raced as I stared at the page. I didn't write that. I grabbed my grandmother's pendant and held it tightly, whispering a prayer she taught me when I was little. "Protect me," I said softly, over and over again. That's when I heard her voice, my grandmother's voice, clear as day in my head. "Elaine," she said gently, "you need to listen." It wasn't like hearing someone talk out loud. It was more like remembering something she'd said long ago, but with perfect clarity. She told me about rituals for protection, about symbols that could keep evil away. She reminded me of stories she'd told me as a child about skinwalkers, witches who could take the shape of animals they'd killed and mimic human voices to lure people into traps. I didn't want to believe it, but everything she said lined up with what was happening here. The mutilated coyote, the symbols carved into trees, the voice calling my name from the ravine. She told me to draw protective symbols around myself and keep my pendant close. "They can't touch you if you stay inside," she said, "but don't let them trick you." When I woke up fully, it was morning again, and her words were still fresh in my mind. I grabbed a stick and started drawing symbols in the dirt around. The station, circles connected by lines with arrows pointing outward, and whispered another prayer as I worked. The air felt lighter somehow when I finished, like some invisible weight had lifted off my shoulders. But even with the symbols in place, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something was still watching me. That night, the air was colder than it had been before. Even with the fire burning in the old station's fireplace, I couldn't shake the chill creeping into my bones. The protective symbols I'd drawn around the building gave me some comfort, but not enough. Something was coming. I could feel it. I sat at the desk, staring out into the darkness through the cracked window. The mist had rolled in again, thick and heavy, swallowing everything beyond a few feet from the station. The silence outside was unnerving. No wind, no crickets, not even the distant howl of a coyote. Just nothing. Then I heard it, a soft rustling sound like footsteps moving through dry grass. At first, I thought it might be an animal, but then I saw them. Shapes moving in the mist. Shadows that didn't look quite human but weren't fully animal either. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the noise. The beam cut through the fog, landing on a pair of glowing yellow eyes staring back at me from just beyond the edge of the light. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what I was looking at, a coyote, but its eyes, they weren't right. They were too human. It stepped closer, slowly, deliberately, and then another shape appeared beside it. A bear with the same glowing eyes, followed by an eagle perched on a low branch with eyes that seemed to burn red in the darkness. They were surrounding me. I backed away from the window and locked the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. But then came the voices. "Elaine." It was Peterson's voice this time, calling out from somewhere in the mist. "Elaine, help me." I froze in place as more voices joined in. My mother's voice, my grandmother's voice, all calling my name in unison like some twisted choir. "Elaine, come outside." "No," I whispered to myself, clutching my grandmother's pendant tightly in my hand. "You're not real." The voices grew louder, more insistent, until they were almost deafening. The walls of the station seemed to vibrate with their intensity. And then, silence. I thought for a moment that they'd left, that maybe the symbols had worked. But when I looked out the window again, they were still there. The coyote stepped forward into the light of my flashlight beam and spoke, not with its mouth, but with Peterson's voice. "Elaine," it said softly, "why are you hiding? Don't you want to know what happened to me?" My hands shook as I backed away from the window again. "You're not Peterson," I said firmly, though my voice wavered with fear. The coyote tilted its head to one side as if amused by my response. Behind it, more shapes began to emerge from the mist. Animals with glowing eyes that flickered between yellow and red. A mountain lion, a deer, even a snake slithering through the dirt. And then one of them changed. The deer stepped forward and began to shift, its body twisting unnaturally until it stood upright on two legs like a man. Its face was still that of a deer, but stretched and wrong, with antlers that seemed too large for its head. It spoke again in Peterson's voice. "We've been watching you for a long time, Elaine." My stomach turned as it continued walking, closer to the station door. "You're different," it said. "You know things others don't. That makes you special." I grabbed a handful of sage from my pack and threw it into the fire like my grandmother had taught me. The flames flared up briefly, filling the room with smoke and a sharp herbal scent. The creatures outside recoiled slightly but didn't leave. "You can join us," another voice said, this time using my grandfather's voice. "We can teach you things no one else can." Tears welled up in my eyes as memories of him flooded back, his kind smile, his steady hands teaching me how to track animals when I was little. But this wasn't him. It couldn't be. "You're not real," I shouted at them through gritted teeth. The deer thing laughed, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine, and stepped closer to the door. "You think your little symbols will protect you forever?" it said mockingly. I closed my eyes and focused on what my grandmother had told me in that dream. Don't let them trick you. Taking a deep breath, I began drawing more protective symbols on the floor around me using ash from the fireplace while whispering prayers under my breath. The creatures outside howled in frustration as I worked quickly but carefully until finally completing a circle around myself, just as one of them slammed against the door hard enough to crack it slightly. The chanting started again, low and rhythmic, but this time I felt stronger somehow. Like my grandmother's spirit was there with me, guiding every step forward, despite overwhelming fear, gripping tightly within every fiber inside myself. As dawn broke over Skinwalker Ridge, illuminating everything once hidden within shadows beneath, moonlight veil finally revealing truth behind horrors encountered throughout night-long battle. Survival instincts prevailed, ultimately banishing entities, temporarily retreating back into unknown depths. Wilderness surrounding area leaving behind eerie silence once more. When the first rays of sunlight broke through the mist, the creatures were gone. The ridge was quiet again, but it wasn't peaceful. It felt like the land was holding its breath, waiting. I stayed inside the protective circle I'd drawn until the sun was fully up, afraid that if I moved too soon, they might come back. My hands were still shaking, and my throat was dry from whispering prayers all night. I didn't feel victorious. I felt drained, like I'd barely made it out alive. Eventually, I forced myself to step out of the station and look around. The mist had cleared completely, and the ridge looked almost normal again. But Peterson was gone. His uniform was still lying where I'd found it, untouched, but there was no sign of him anywhere. I radioed for help later that morning, telling my supervisor that Peterson had gone missing and my truck had broken down. I didn't mention the creatures or the chanting or the protective symbols. I knew they wouldn't believe me. Search teams combed the area for weeks, but they never found him. Not a single trace. Officially, he was listed as missing in the wilderness. But I knew the truth. Peterson hadn't just vanished. He'd been taken. After everything that happened, I convinced the park authorities to close off that section of Skinwalker Ridge permanently. I told them it was unsafe for hikers because of erosion and environmental concerns. But really, I just wanted to keep people away from whatever was out there. I transferred to another park a few months later, hoping to leave Skinwalker Ridge behind, for good. But even in my new station, hundreds of miles away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. At night, I started noticing animals lingering near my cabin, coyotes with glowing eyes standing just outside the tree line, or birds perched on branches staring at me through the window. They never came close enough to be a threat, but they were always there, watching. I kept writing in my journal about everything that happened, every detail about Skinwalker Ridge, every strange sighting since then, but my entries became more paranoid over time. The more I wrote, the more convinced I became that this wasn't over. Eventually, I visited my grandmother again back on the reservation. She listened quietly as I told her everything. The coyote's body, Peterson's disappearance, the creatures surrounding my camp, and when I finished, she didn't look surprised. "Our family has always been connected to them," she said, softly. "They know us." She explained that skinwalkers had haunted our people for generations, watching us, testing us, trying to lure us into their world. She told me she'd placed protective symbols on my turquoise pendant when I was little, because she knew someday I might need them. "You were strong," she said with a proud smile. "You didn't let them trick you." I felt comforted by her words, but also uneasy. If they'd been watching our family for generations, what did that mean for me? Would they ever stop? I don't know if Skinwalker Ridge will ever truly leave. Me alone. Maybe it's part of me now, something I'll carry forever like a shadow that never fades. But one thing is certain. Whatever those creatures are, whatever they want, they're still out there, waiting. My name is Marcus Holloway, and I've been a park ranger in Shoshone National Forest for over 15 years. People say I know these woods like the back of my hand, but lately, I'm not so sure. There's something about this place, something ancient, that makes you feel small, like you're just passing through while it watches silently. It was early morning, just after dawn, and the forest was waking up. The sunlight filtered through the thick canopy of towering pine trees, casting golden beams onto the moss-covered ground. Mist clung to the forest floor, swirling around rocks and fallen logs like it had a life of its own. Blackwater Creek bubbled softly nearby, its sound calming in a way only nature can be. I took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs. The scent of pine sap mixed with wildflowers, it was intoxicating, almost magical. A family of elk grazed in a clearing ahead, their breath visible in the chilly morning air. Birds called to each other from above. Woodpeckers tapping away at tree trunks, jays squawking in the distance, and even an eagle's cry echoing through the trees. Everything felt alive, peaceful, but there was something else too. A feeling I couldn't shake, like the forest was watching me back. I glanced at Diane Powell, the new seasonal ranger I'd been assigned to train. She was younger than me by at least 10 years and full of energy. Too much energy for my liking. She was adjusting her compass and chatting about how beautiful the forest was. But I wasn't really listening. My mind kept drifting back to those nightmares I'd been having lately. They were always the same. Me wandering through these woods, lost in a part I didn't recognize, with something following me just out of sight. A gust of wind suddenly swept through the trees, sending pine needles raining down like green confetti. The temperature dropped noticeably, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me. Diane stopped, talking mid-sentence, and looked up at the sky. "Looks like clouds are rolling in," she said casually, but it wasn't just clouds, it was something else. The forest seemed to change in an instant. The birds stopped calling. Even Blackwater Creek sounded quieter than before. The stillness was unnatural, like everything had frozen in place. I felt my stomach tighten as I scanned the area. "Let's keep moving," I said firmly, trying to shake off the unease creeping into my chest. As we walked deeper into the woods, I couldn't help but notice how quiet it had become. Our footsteps sounded louder than they should have, like we were intruding on something we weren't supposed to see. I didn't say it out loud, but I could feel it. Something wasn't right. My name is Marcus Holloway, and like I said, I've been a park ranger for a long time. 15 years in these woods teaches you things. How to read the land, how to stay calm when things go wrong, and how to respect the forest. But it also leaves its mark on you. I'm not the same man I was when I first started this job. Life has a way of wearing you down. My marriage fell apart 5 years ago, and my son, well, let's just say we don't talk much anymore. He's 17 now, and I barely know him. The only thing I have left is this leather bracelet he made for me when he was little. It's worn and frayed, but I still wear it every day. It reminds me of better times, even if those times feel like a lifetime ago. Diane Powell was walking ahead of me, her bright orange jacket standing out against the deep greens of the forest. She was new, just a seasonal hire, but she had that spark of excitement that rookies always have. She asked a lot of questions, most of which I answered with short replies. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want to get too attached. People come and go in this job. It's better not to get close. "Marcus," she called back to me, "what's the weirdest thing you've ever seen out here?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. "A mountain lion," I said simply. Her eyes widened. "Did it attack you?" I held up my right arm, showing her the jagged scar that ran from my elbow to my wrist. "It got close enough," I said. She laughed nervously, but I could tell she didn't know what to say after that. Most people don't. The truth is, that scar isn't the worst thing these woods have given me. Over the years, I've seen things that don't make sense. Strange lights in the trees at night, whispers when there's no one around, and once, a shadow that moved on its own. I've written them all down in a journal I keep in my pack. It's not official ranger business. It's just for me. A way to make sense of what I've seen. Diane didn't know about any of that yet. She was still too busy admiring the scenery and snapping pictures with her phone. As we walked further into the forest, I felt that familiar unease creeping back in. The same feeling from my nightmares. The trees seemed taller here, their branches twisting together like they were trying to block out the sky. The air felt heavier, colder. I tried to shake it off and focus on Diane instead. "Stay close," I told her firmly. She nodded, but didn't seem worried. She didn't feel it yet. The tension in the air, the way the forest seemed to be holding its breath. I glanced down at my bracelet again and tightened it around my wrist. Whatever was out here, whatever was making me feel this way, it wasn't going to scare me off. Not yet. The deeper we went into the forest, the quieter it became. It wasn't just the birds. Everything had stopped. No rustling leaves, no insects, buzzing, not even the sound of Blackwater Creek. It was like the forest had gone mute. Diane finally noticed it too. She slowed her pace and looked around, her brow furrowing. "Why is it so quiet?" she asked softly, almost like she was afraid to break the silence. I didn't answer right away. I just scanned the trees, my gut telling me something was off. I'd felt this kind of silence before, but never this strong. It wasn't natural. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath. We kept walking. and that's when we saw the first sign. A tree ahead of us had strange markings carved into its bark, symbols I didn't recognize. They weren't random scratches or graffiti. They were precise, almost ancient-looking. Diane crouched down to get a closer look, tracing one of the symbols with her finger. "What do you think this means?" she asked. I shook my head, my voice low. "I don't know. But I did know one thing. These weren't made by animals or hikers. Someone, or something, had put them here for a reason." We moved on, but the unease in my chest grew heavier with each step. The forest felt different now, like we weren't alone anymore. A few minutes later, Diane stopped suddenly and pointed ahead. "Marcus, look." Hanging from a low tree branch was a hiker's backpack. It looked untouched, like someone had just set it there and walked away. I approached it cautiously, scanning the area for any signs of the owner. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing through the trees. No answer. I opened the backpack and found typical hiking gear inside: water bottles, granola bars, a map, but nothing that explained why it had been left behind. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints leading away from it. Just, nothing. Diane stepped closer and wrinkled her nose. "Do you smell that?" At first, I didn't notice it, but then it hit me. A putrid stench like rotting meat mixed with something sulfuric and strange. It was so strong I had to cover my mouth and nose with my sleeve. "Stay close," I told Diane again, more firmly this time. We kept moving, but the smell didn't go away. It seemed to follow us like a shadow. Then came another sign. Large footprints in the dirt ahead of us, humanoid but bigger than any humans should be. The toes were long and clawed, and they seemed to change direction halfway through as if whatever made them had doubled back on itself. Diane stared at them in disbelief. What kind of animal leaves tracks like that? I didn't answer because I didn't know. The tension in the air was almost suffocating now, and even Diane had stopped talking entirely. As we followed the trail further, we came across something that made my stomach drop. A deer carcass hanging high in the branches of a pine tree. Its body was broken in ways that didn't make sense. Its blood drained completely, leaving it partially mummified. Diane gasped and stumbled backward, her hand covering her mouth. I forced myself to look closer despite every instinct screaming at me to turn around and leave. "This isn't right," I muttered under my breath. The temperature dropped even more as we pressed on, our breath forming thick clouds in front of us even though it was supposed to be summer. Diane pulled out her compass to check our direction and froze. "Marcus, my compass is spinning," she said shakily. I looked at it myself and saw she was right. The needle was spinning wildly as if it couldn't find north anymore. That's when we reached the final sign. A rock face blocking our path where there shouldn't have been one. "This trail doesn't end here," I said firmly, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "I've walked this path dozens of times. It goes straight through." But there it was, a solid wall of stone where there should have been open forest. Diane looked at me nervously as if waiting for me to explain what was happening. I didn't have an explanation, not one that made sense anyway. All I knew was that something wasn't right, and whatever it was, we were walking straight into it. Diane and I stood there, staring at the rock face that shouldn't have been there. The trail we'd followed for years had simply ended. "I don't understand," Diane whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Trails don't just disappear, and rock faces don't appear out of nowhere. The silence around us felt heavier now, pressing down like a weight on my chest. Even the air felt wrong, thicker somehow, harder to breathe. Then I saw it, through the trees, just at the edge of my vision, something moved. It wasn't an animal. It was too tall, too thin, but it wasn't human either. Its limbs were elongated, almost unnatural, and it moved with a strange fluidity that made my skin crawl. "Diane," I said quietly, not taking my eyes off the figure. "Don't move." She froze beside me, her breathing shallow. "What is it?" she whispered. "I don't know," I said honestly. The figure stopped moving and stood perfectly still, blending into the trees so well that if I hadn't seen it move earlier, I might have missed it entirely. Its skin looked like bark and fungus, like it was part of the forest itself. Antlers sprouted from what should have been its head, but there were no eyes or mouth, just smooth, featureless skin. And then it spoke. Not with words, but with sound. A voice that wasn't its own. It mimicked my son's voice perfectly, calling out from different directions at once. "Dad, help me." My stomach dropped as chills ran down my spine. It wasn't possible. My son was miles away in town. But hearing his voice out here made me feel sick. Diane grabbed my arm tightly. "Marcus, what's going on?" I didn't answer because I didn't know how to explain it. The creature moved again, not toward us but through the forest in a way that didn't make sense. It seemed to phase through solid objects like tree trunks and rocks, disappearing from one spot only to reappear somewhere else. Wherever it went, the vegetation around it withered and died as if it was sucking the life out of everything nearby. I tightened my grip on Diane's arm and started backing away slowly. "We need to leave," I said firmly, but as we turned to go, roots began rising from the ground behind us, twisting together like they were trying to block our path. "Marcus!" Diane shouted as she stumbled over one of the roots. I grabbed her arm and pulled her upright just as branches from above started reaching down toward us like grasping hands. The forest itself seemed alive now, hostile and angry, and the creature was at the center of it all. It moved closer this time, faster than before, but only when we weren't looking directly at it. When we turned to face it head-on, it stopped completely as if frozen in place. I couldn't explain how I knew this, but somehow I understood. It didn't want to be seen directly. "Don't take your eyes off it," I told Diane urgently. She nodded shakily but kept glancing over her shoulder at the roots and branches closing in around us. The creature stopped again, standing just a few yards away now. It tilted its featureless head slightly as if studying us, or maybe just me. And then came the worst part. It spoke again in my son's voice. "Dad, why did you leave me?" The words hit me like a punch to the gut because they weren't random. They were real. My son had said those exact words during one of our last arguments before he stopped talking to me altogether. How did this thing know? How could it possibly know? I felt frozen in place as guilt washed over me like a tidal wave. The creature seemed to sense it too because its movements became more deliberate now. Closer, slower, as if feeding off my emotions. Diane tugged on my arm desperately. "Marcus, we have to go." But I couldn't move, not yet, not until I understood what this thing wanted from me. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, staring at the creature, its featureless head tilted slightly, almost like it was waiting for me to make a move. Diane was pulling on my arm, her voice frantic, but I barely heard her. The words it had spoken, my son's words, echoed in my head. "Why did you leave? Me? How did it know? How could it possibly know?" The creature stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate. The ground beneath its feet seemed to rot with every step, the grass turning black and brittle. "Marcus!" Diane shouted, snapping me out of my trance. I grabbed her hand and started running, my heart pounding in my chest. The forest around us felt alive, hostile. Roots rose from the ground, twisting together like barriers while branches reached down from above, clawing at our clothes. We ran blindly through the maze of trees, the creature's presence pressing down on us like a weight. I didn't dare look back. I didn't want to see how close it was. Ahead of us, through the thick fog that had suddenly appeared, I saw the outline of an old fire lookout tower. It was abandoned years ago but still stood tall among the trees. "Get to the tower," I shouted to Diane. We scrambled up the wooden stairs as fast as we could, slamming the door shut behind us once we reached the top. The room was small and empty except for an old desk and chair covered in dust. For a moment, I thought we were safe, but then I saw them. The same strange symbols we'd seen carved into the trees were now scratched into the walls of the tower. They covered every surface, the ceiling, the floor, even the windows. Diane noticed them too and backed away from the walls like they might reach out and grab her. "What is this place?" she whispered. I didn't answer because I didn't know. But I did know one thing. Whatever those symbols meant, they weren't good. Outside, the fog grew thicker until we couldn't see anything beyond the windows. And then we heard it. The sound of branches creaking and roots twisting as the creature surrounded the tower. It didn't try to break in right away. It just waited outside like it was playing with us. I searched the room desperately for something, anything, that could help us fight back. That's when I spotted an old journal tucked into a corner of the desk. The cover was worn and faded, but when I opened it, I realized what it was. A ranger's log from 1936. The entries were short and scattered at first. Notes about weather, conditions, and wildlife sightings, but then they changed. One entry caught my eye immediately. "The forest is wrong. Something is here." Further down, another entry read, "It feeds on guilt and pain." And finally, "A ritual may stop it, but only if done correctly." I scanned through the pages frantically until I found details about the ritual. A series of steps involving fire and certain words that had to be spoken aloud. "Diane," I said urgently, "we need to do this ritual." She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "What are you talking about?" "This thing. It's drawn to guilt," I explained, quickly. "It knows what you're afraid of. It uses it against you." She hesitated but nodded slowly. "Okay, what do we need?" Before I could answer, there was a loud crash as one of the windows shattered behind us. The creature had breached the tower. It moved faster now, its limbs stretching unnaturally as it climbed through the broken window. Diane screamed as it lunged toward her with one of its branch-like arms. I grabbed a piece of wood from the broken window frame and swung it at the creature with all my strength, knocking it back temporarily. "Start the fire," I shouted at Diane while trying to keep the creature away from her. She scrambled to light a small pile of wood with matches she'd found in her pack while reciting the words from the journal aloud. The creature roared, a sound that wasn't human or animal, as if it understood what we were trying to do. It turned its attention back to me now, its movements faster and more aggressive than before. One of its limbs lashed out and caught me across my chest, knocking me to the ground hard enough to make my vision blur. Through hazy eyes, I saw Diane finish lighting the fire, but before she could complete the ritual, one of the creature's limbs impaled her through her shoulder. She cried out in pain, but kept going despite everything, reciting each word with determination etched into her face. Forced myself up despite every muscle in my body screaming at me to stay down, and grabbed one of the burning logs from our makeshift fire. With a final burst of strength fueled by pure adrenaline, I swung it directly at the creature's featureless head while shouting out loud, "Leave this place!" The fire seemed to spread across its body instantly, engulfing it in flames that burned brighter than any normal fire should have been able to burn. And then it dissolved into a cloud of spores that scattered into nothingness. The creature was gone. At least I thought it was. The spores it dissolved into had scattered into the night, vanishing into the thick fog that still clung to the forest. The air felt lighter now, but not completely normal. It was like the forest was holding its breath again, waiting for something else to happen. I turned to Diane, who was slumped against the wall of the lookout tower. Blood seeped from her shoulder where the creature's branch-like limb had impaled her, but she was still alive. Her face was pale and her breathing shallow, but she managed to look up at me. Did we stop it?" she asked weakly. Nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure myself. "For now," I said, "it's gone. I tore a strip of fabric from my shirt and pressed it against her wound to slow the bleeding. She winced, but didn't complain. "We need to get you out of here," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos still swirling in my mind. But as I helped her to her feet, I noticed something strange on her skin, just below the wound. A faint pattern of fungal growth spread outward like veins beneath her flesh. It pulsed faintly, almost as if it were alive. "Diane." I started, but she shook her head. "I'm fine," she said quickly, though we both knew that wasn't. True, I didn't argue. There wasn't time. We made our way down the tower and back into the forest. The fog had started to lift, and the oppressive silence was slowly being replaced by the soft sounds of nature, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of a bird. It should have been comforting, but it wasn't. Everything felt different. By the time we reached the ranger station, Diane could barely stand. I called for help on the radio, and within an hour, a team arrived to take her to the hospital. I stayed behind, unable to leave just yet. The forest had returned to normal, or at least it seemed like it had, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The trees looked taller somehow, their branches twisting in ways I didn't remember. The air smelled different too, sharper, almost metallic. And then there were the symbols. They were everywhere now, on trees, rocks, even carved into the wooden walls of the ranger station. I hadn't noticed them before, but now they seemed impossible to miss. That night, I sat alone in my cabin, staring at my journal, the one where I'd written down all the strange things I'd seen over the years. None of it made sense before, but now it felt like pieces of a puzzle were starting to come together. I opened it to a blank page and began writing again, not about what had happened that day, but about what might happen next. The journal from 1936 had mentioned a cycle, a pattern, that repeated every 40 years. If that was true, then this wasn't over. As I wrote, my hand started moving on its own. When I looked down at the page, I realized I wasn't writing words anymore. I was drawing symbols, the same ones we'd seen in the forest. I dropped the pen and stared at my hand in horror. My fingers were trembling, but not from fear, from something else entirely. The nightmares came back that night, stronger than ever before. This time, I wasn't just lost in an unfamiliar part of the forest. I was being watched. And when I woke up in a cold sweat, there was something waiting for me in the mirror. An antler. Just one, small and jagged, growing from my temple like a twisted crown. I stared at my reflection for what felt like hours, unable to move or speak. The forest wasn't done with me. Not yet. My name is Thomas Miller, and I've been a park ranger for most of my adult life. But I wasn't always this way. Before coming to Loveland, Ohio, I served in the Korean War. Those years changed me forever. I lost my younger brother there, and not a day goes by that I don't think about him. After the war ended, I needed a quiet place to escape the noise in my head, the memories, the guilt, the nightmares. That's how I ended up here, in Loveland. Loveland is a small town surrounded by dense forests and winding creeks. It's peaceful, most of the time, but there's something about this place that feels different. The locals talk about strange things happening near the Little Miami River, especially around the old abandoned canal lock. They say it's haunted, but I never paid much attention to those stories, at least not until that spring night. It was an unseasonably warm evening in late March, the kind of night where the mist rises off the water and clings to the trees like a ghostly veil. The ancient sycamores and willows formed a canopy over the murky creek, their twisted branches casting eerie shadows under the moonlight. My cabin was tucked away deep in the woods, far from town. It was just me and Duke, my loyal German shepherd, living out here. Duke had been with me since I got back from Korea. He was more than just a dog. He was family. That night started like any other. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, whistled for Duke, and headed out for my routine patrol along the creek. The air smelled damp and earthy with a faint metallic tang that I couldn't quite place. The woods were quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves or chirp of crickets. But something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As we walked along the creek bank, Duke suddenly stopped in his tracks. His ears perked up, and he let out a low growl. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, shining my flashlight ahead. That's when I saw them. Strange footprints. In the mud. They were about the size of a human hand, but had 3 webbed toes instead of 5. The prints led down to the water and disappeared. I crouched down to get a better look, my heart pounding in my chest. What kind of animal leaves footprints like these? I muttered to myself. Duke sniffed at them but backed away quickly, his tail tucked between his legs. I tried to brush it off as nothing, a prank maybe, but deep down I knew better. Something wasn't right. I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints. They didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before, and I've seen my fair share of strange things in the woods. The next day, I decided to ask around town. Most folks just laughed it off when I mentioned it. "Probably just a big snapping turtle," one of the fishermen said with a chuckle. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of unease, that made me wonder if he knew more than he was letting. On later that afternoon, I ran into old Mr. Hargrove, a retired fisherman who'd lived in Loveland his whole life. When I brought up the footprints, his face went pale. He leaned in close and whispered, "You stay away from that creek at night, you hear me? There's things out there you don't want to mess with." Before I could ask him what he meant, he shuffled off, muttering something about water demons. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I headed back out for my patrol. Duke trotted beside me, his tail wagging as we walked along the familiar trail by the creek. The air was heavy with humidity, and the mist was already starting to rise from the water. Everything felt still. Too still. About halfway through my route, I heard it, a faint croaking sound coming from the direction of the creek. At first, I thought it was just frogs. But this wasn't like any frog I'd ever heard before. The sound was deeper, almost melodic, like it was trying to form words. Duke stopped and let out a low growl again, his ears pinned back. "Easy, boy," I said softly, gripping my flashlight a little tighter. The croaking grew louder, echoing through the trees. It seemed to be coming from all around us now, like we were surrounded. My heart started to race as I scanned the area with my flashlight. But there was nothing, just shadows and mist. We kept moving, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Then we came across something that made my blood run cold. A deer carcass lying near the water's edge. Its body had been torn open with surgical precision, its organs missing. There were no signs of struggle, no blood trail leading away from the scene, just the deer and those same 3-toed footprints in the mud. I knelt down to examine it while Duke barked furiously at the water. "What did this?" I muttered under my breath. It wasn't a bear or a coyote. This was something else entirely. As we stood there, my radio crackled to life with static. At first, I thought it was just interference from being so close to the water, but then I heard something that made my stomach twist. A garbled voice speaking backwards through the static. It was faint, but unmistakable. "Hello? Who's there?" I said into the radio, but there was no response, just more static and that strange voice. Duke barked again, pulling me out of my thoughts. He was staring at something across the creek now, his fur bristling as he growled low in his throat. I followed his gaze but saw nothing, just more trees and shadows. "Come on," I said finally, tugging on his leash. "Let's get out of here." As we made our way back to the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone out there. Whatever had left those footprints and done that to the deer was still out there somewhere in the dark. After that night, things started to get stranger. The croaking sounds didn't stop. They seemed to follow me everywhere near the creek. It wasn't just me hearing them either. A few local fishermen came by my cabin one morning, looking rattled. They said they'd been out on the water late at night when they heard voices calling their names from the creek. One of them swore he saw something moving in the mist, something tall and hunched over with glowing yellow eyes. I wanted to dismiss it as paranoia or maybe too much whiskey, but deep down, I knew they weren't lying. I'd seen those footprints. I'd heard the garbled voice on my radio, and now other people were starting to notice things too. A few days later, Duke and I were patrolling near the creek again when we found something that sent chills down my spine. A small child's shoe lying half buried in the mud. It looked old and worn, like it had been there for weeks, maybe months. But what caught my attention was the strange residue on it. A slimy, greenish substance that seemed to shimmer faintly in the sunlight. I picked it up carefully, turning it over in my hands while Duke sniffed at it nervously. "What's a kid's shoe doing all the way out here?" I muttered to myself. There hadn't been any reports of missing children recently, not since those hikers disappeared back in February. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing that shoe and those footprints in the mud. Around midnight, I heard Duke growling softly by the window. I got up to check and froze when I saw what was outside. My cabin was surrounded, completely surrounded, by dozens of glowing yellow eyes staring back at me through the darkness. The croaking sound was deafening now, echoing off the trees like some kind of twisted symphony. My windows were coated in slime, dripping down the glass in thick streaks. Duke barked furiously, his teeth bared as he paced back and forth near the door. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight, trying to steady my shaking hands as I aimed toward the window. "Get out of here," I shouted, but the croaking only grew louder. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The glowing eyes vanished into the mist, and everything went silent again. Too silent. The next morning, I decided to do some digging. Something about all this felt familiar, like I'd heard stories like this before but couldn't quite place them. I went into town and spent hours combing through old newspaper archives at the library until I found what I was looking for. Series of articles from 1939 describing identical sightings near Loveland Creek. The headlines read, "Strange humanoid creatures spotted near Little Miami River," and "Fishermen report encounter with frog-like beings." Witnesses described creatures that were 4 to 5 feet tall with leathery green-gray skin and bulging yellow eyes that glowed in the dark. Some even claimed these creatures carried strange wand-like devices that emitted sparks or electrical discharges. Sat there staring at the articles for what felt like hours, my mind racing. Whatever these things were, they'd been here before, and now they were back. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in over my head. Whatever was happening near the creek wasn't just some harmless prank or local legend. It was real, and it was dangerous. Duke had been acting strange ever since that night with the glowing eyes. He refused to go near the water now, growling and whining whenever we got close. It was like he could sense something I couldn't. A few nights later, I decided to patrol closer to the old canal lock, the one everyone said was haunted. I didn't believe in ghosts, but there was something about that place that made my skin crawl. The lock had been abandoned for decades, its stone walls crumbling and covered in moss. The water around it was stagnant and foul-smelling, with patches of mist swirling above the surface. Duke stayed close to me as we walked along the edge of the lock. His ears were pinned back and his tail hung low, a sure sign he was nervous. I kept my flashlight trained ahead, scanning for anything unusual. That's when Duke froze. His nose pointed toward a dark opening in the ground, a tunnel leading beneath the lock. "Easy, boy," I whispered, gripping my rifle tightly. The tunnel looked like it hadn't been touched in years, but there were fresh footprints leading inside, those same 3-toed prints I'd seen before. I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air was damp and cold, with a faint smell of decay. Duke followed reluctantly, his growls echoing off the stone walls. The tunnel opened up into a large underground chamber, and what I saw there made my stomach turn. In the center of the room was a nest-like structure made of sticks, mud, and slime. Scattered around it were personal items, watches, wallets, shoes, all covered in that same greenish residue I'd found on the child's shoe. I recognized some of the items immediately. They belonged to the hikers who'd gone missing back in February. Before I could process what I was seeing, Duke started barking furiously at something across the room. I swung my flashlight around and froze, standing. There were 3 figures, humanoid but not human. Their leathery skin glistened in the dim light, and their bulging yellow eyes seemed to glow as they stared back at me. They were performing some kind of ritual around a cocoon-like structure hanging from the ceiling. The cocoon pulsed faintly, like it was alive. One of the creatures stepped forward, holding a wand-like device that crackled with electricity. Its croaking voice filled the chamber, melodic and haunting. I felt my legs lock up as its glowing eyes fixed on mine. It was like I couldn't move, like I was trapped in some kind of trance. But then Duke lunged at the creature with a ferocious snarl, breaking its hold on me. He sank his teeth into its arm, forcing it to drop the wand as it let out a high-pitched screech. I snapped out of it and raised my rifle, firing a shot that hit one of the creatures square in the chest. It stumbled back, blue, phosphorescent blood oozing from the wound. The other 2 creatures turned toward me, their croaking growing louder and more frantic. Duke barked wildly as they advanced, but before they could reach me, the wounded creature let out another screech, a sound so piercing it made my ears ring. Suddenly, more glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, dozens of them, and they were all coming toward us. "Run!" I shouted to Duke as we bolted out of the chamber and back into the tunnel. I didn't stop running until I was out of the tunnel and back in the open air. My chest was burning, and my legs felt like they might give out, but I couldn't afford to slow down. Duke was right beside me, barking furiously as the croaking sounds grew louder behind us. They were chasing us. I could hear their heavy splashes in the creek and the strange, unnatural clicking noises they made as they moved. The mist had thickened, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. My flashlight beam cut through the fog, but every shadow looked like it could be one of those creatures. I knew we couldn't outrun them, not with how fast they moved in the water. My mind raced as I tried to think of a plan. That's when I remembered my Jeep. It was parked about half a mile away, just off one of the main trails. If I could get there, I might have a chance to fight back. "Come on, Duke!" I shouted, pushing myself harder as we sprinted through the trees. The croaking was deafening now, echoing all around us. I glanced over my shoulder and saw them, dozens of glowing yellow eyes leaping through the mist, their leathery skin glistening under the moonlight. We reached the Jeep just as one of the creatures lunged at us from the creek bank. Duke snarled and jumped in front of me, snapping at its face. Before it could get too close, the creature hissed and backed off for a moment, but more were coming. I threw open the Jeep's door and grabbed the gas canister I kept in the back for emergencies. My hands were shaking as I unscrewed the cap and started pouring gasoline in. A wide circle around us. "Stay close," I yelled to Duke as I fumbled for my lighter. The creatures were closing in now, their croaking turning into an eerie harmony that made my skin crawl. Finally, I flicked the lighter and tossed it onto the gasoline. Flames erupted around us, creating a barrier between us and them. For a moment, I thought it might work, that they'd back off, but instead they screeched in unison and charged straight through the fire. I braced myself for impact, but then something unexpected happened. The flames didn't just burn them, they exploded on contact with their slimy skin. One by one, the creatures burst into bright blue sparks as they hit the fire, their bodies disintegrating into ash. The remaining frogmen hesitated for a moment before retreating back into the creek, their glowing eyes disappearing beneath the surface. I stood there trembling, watching as the flames died down and silence returned to the forest. Duke whimpered softly beside me, his fur singed but otherwise unharmed. "We did it," I whispered shakily, kneeling down to hug him. "We're okay." But our relief was short-lived. Just as we started to head back toward the cabin, one last creature emerged from the water, larger than any of the others I'd seen before. Its eyes burned brighter than ever as it lunged at Duke with terrifying speed. Duke barked fiercely and attacked without hesitation, biting down on its arm as it dragged him toward the creek. "No!" I screamed, firing my rifle at it over and over again. But it didn't stop. It disappeared into the water with Duke still fighting against it. I ran to the edge of the creek, shouting his name over and over again until my voice was hoarse. But he never came back. The sun was starting to rise by the time I made it back to the cabin. I felt hollow, like I'd left a part of myself back there in the creek. Duke was gone. My best friend, my protector. He'd saved my life, and I couldn't save his. I sat on the porch steps, staring at his empty collar in my hands, the greenish slime still clinging to it. The forest was quiet now, but it didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy, like it was holding on to a terrible secret. Later that morning, I called the local authorities and told them everything. About the footprints, the mutilated deer, the glowing eyes, and the creatures in the creek. I even took them to the underground chamber beneath the canal lock. But when we got there, it was empty. The nest was gone, along with all the personal items I'd seen. There wasn't even a trace of slime left behind. The sheriff gave me a long look before shaking his head. "You've been through a lot, Miller," he said quietly. "Maybe you're just seeing things. War does strange things to a man's mind." I wanted to scream at him, to make him understand that this wasn't just some hallucination or nightmare. But what could I say? There was no proof anymore, and even if there had been, who would believe me? The creek was drained later that week as part of an official investigation into the missing hikers. They didn't find anything unusual, not even Duke's body. The sheriff filed my report under wild animal attack and closed the case. I thought about leaving Loveland after that, starting fresh somewhere far away from these woods and their secrets. But I couldn't bring myself to go. Duke had given his life to protect me, and I couldn't abandon him like that. Instead, I built a small memorial for him by the creek, a simple wooden cross with his name carved into it. Every spring I'd visit it and leave a bouquet of wildflowers. For years after that night, strange things continued to happen near the creek. People reported hearing barking late at night, barking that sounded eerily like Duke's. But no one ever saw a dog there. Fishermen claimed they felt something watching them from beneath the water, though they never saw anything. As for me, I stayed on as Loveland's park ranger until I retired years later. But I never stopped patrolling near the creek, not really to keep people safe anymore, but because part of me hoped Duke might still be out there somewhere. Even now, when spring rolls around and the mist rises off the water, I sometimes hear it, the faint sound of barking echoing through the trees. And every time I do, I whisper softly into the night, "Good boy." My name is William Foster. I'm a park ranger stationed in one of the most remote areas of Michigan, the Manistee National Forest. It's a place where ancient pine trees tower over you like giants, and the wind whispers through the branches, as if it's carrying secrets. I came here to escape my past, to find some kind of peace after everything I've been through. But instead, I found something. Something I can't explain. I wasn't always a ranger. 7 years ago, I was a police detective in Detroit. My life changed forever after a shooting incident. A teenager lost his life because of my decision. It wasn't entirely my fault, but that doesn't matter. The guilt eats at you, and it doesn't stop. I left the city, left my family, and ended up here in the wilderness, hoping to outrun the nightmares. Manistee National Forest is beautiful, but unforgiving. The locals talk about strange things happening here, legends passed down by the native Odawa people who say there are places in these woods not meant for man. At first, I thought it was just folklore, stories to keep kids from wandering too far into the forest. But lately, I've started to wonder if there's more to it than that. This winter has been brutal. Record-breaking blizzards have turned the forest into an icy wasteland. Snow piles up so high that even the tallest trees look like they're drowning in white. The shoreline of Lake Michigan is frozen solid, creating ice caves that look like something out of a dream, or maybe a nightmare. The fog rolls in thick and heavy, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. 3 hikers disappeared last November before the snowstorms hit. We searched for them for days, but eventually had to call it off when the weather got too dangerous. People said they probably got lost and froze to death, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. Something about their disappearance didn't sit right with me. I spend most of my days patrolling the forest alone now, keeping an eye out for illegal hunters and logging operations that have been popping up since the economy took a downturn. It's quiet out here, too quiet sometimes, and it gives me too much time to think about everything I've lost. My wife, my son, and any chance of living a normal life again. But then came the night when everything changed. The night when I realized this forest holds secrets far darker than anything I could have imagined. It started with something strange, something I couldn't explain. I was out on my usual patrol, trudging through the snow-covered trails. The air was biting cold, and the forest was eerily silent, except for the crunch of my boots and the occasional creak of branches weighed down by ice. It was one of those days where the world felt completely still, like even the animals were hiding from something. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light. A few yards ahead, in a small clearing, there were deer carcasses, 3 of them, standing upright in the snow. I froze in my tracks, staring at them. They weren't just standing, they were frozen solid like statues. Their heads were tilted back unnaturally, their mouths open as if they'd been screaming before they died. I walked closer, my breath fogging up in front of me. The deer were arranged in a perfect circle, their hooves buried deep in the snow. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle, just these lifeless bodies standing there like some kind of sick art display. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I radioed it in to headquarters, but with the storm rolling in, the signal was weak and crackling. All I got back was static and a garbled response before the line went dead. Great, I thought to myself. Just me and these creepy deer statues out here in the middle of nowhere. I marked the spot on my map and decided to keep moving. Maybe it was some kind of freak accident, though I couldn't imagine how or why. As I walked deeper into the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every so often, I'd stop and look over my shoulder, but there was nothing there except trees and snow. A couple of hours later, I stumbled across an old campsite tucked away in a grove of pines. The tents were shredded, ripped apart from the inside out, but there wasn't a single drop of blood anywhere. Clothes and gear were scattered around like whoever had been there left in a hurry, or never came back at all. I crouched down to examine one of the tents more closely when I noticed something else. Tracks in the snow. They were large, too large to be human, and looked like they belonged to some kind of canine. But here's the thing. They weren't normal tracks. They were bipedal, like whatever made them had been walking on 2 legs instead of 4. The tracks led away from the campsite but disappeared after only a few yards, as if whatever made them had just vanished into thin air. I stood there for a long time, staring at those tracks and trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My gut told me to leave, to turn around and head back to base, but my curiosity got the better of me. That's when I heard it. A low growl, coming from somewhere deep in the woods behind me. It wasn't like any animal sound I'd ever heard before. It was deep and guttural, almost like it came from something bigger than anything that should have been out here. My hand instinctively went to my sidearm as I scanned the trees for movement, but there was nothing there, just shadows dancing in the wind-blown snow. I didn't stick around after that. On my way back to base, an old hunter flagged me down near one of the access roads. He looked spooked. his face pale and his hand shaking as he handed me something wrapped in an old cloth. "Found this up at one of those abandoned cabins," he said in a low voice, glancing nervously over his shoulder like he expected something to jump out at him any second. I unwrapped it carefully and found an old leather-bound journal inside. The pages were yellowed with age and filled with shaky handwriting describing sightings of something, a wolf that walked like a man. "You ever hear about those stories?" he asked me quietly. I nodded slowly but didn't say anything. "Be careful out here," he added before turning and disappearing into his truck. That night, as I sat alone in my cabin reading through that journal by lantern light, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been described in those pages wasn't just some old legend. It was real. The next few days were unsettling. I couldn't stop thinking about the deer carcasses, the shredded tents, and the journal. The entries in that journal were detailed, almost obsessive, describing encounters with a creature that seemed to defy logic. The writer called it the Dogman. They claimed it was 7 feet tall, walked on 2 legs, and had glowing blue eyes that could paralyze you with fear. I wanted to dismiss it as nonsense, just some old hunter's imagination running wild. But after what I'd seen out there, I wasn't so sure anymore. The forest felt different now. Every time I went out on patrol, I felt like I wasn't alone. It was subtle at first, a rustle in the bushes, a shadow that moved just out of sight, but it got worse as the days went on. One afternoon, as I was checking the trails near the frozen shoreline of Lake Michigan, my radio crackled to life. At first, I thought it was just static, but then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Children's laughter. It sounded faint and distant, like it was coming from somewhere deep in the forest. But here's the thing. There weren't any kids out here. The nearest town was miles away, and with the blizzard conditions, no one should have been wandering around in these woods. I tried calling out on the radio, but the laughter faded into static before I could get a response. Then came the howling. It wasn't like a wolf or a coyote. It was deeper, louder, almost unnatural. The sound seemed to vibrate through my chest, making my heart race and my hands tremble. I turned off the radio and started heading back toward base as quickly as I could without breaking into a full-on sprint. On my way back, I noticed something else. Claw marks on the trees. They were at eye level, too high up for any normal animal, and looked fresh, like whatever made them had been following me for some time. That night, as I sat in my cabin trying to calm my nerves with a bottle of whiskey, I heard scratching at my window. It wasn't loud, just faint enough to make me wonder if I was imagining it, but when I looked outside, there was nothing there except the swirling snow and darkness. I barely slept that night. The next morning, another hiker went missing. A young man named Eric who'd been camping near one of the trails despite warnings about the weather. His friends reported him missing after he didn't return to their cabin. I knew we couldn't wait any longer. I organized a search party with 3 volunteers: Jackson, an experienced hunter; Martinez, a local who knew these woods better than anyone; and Wilson, a forestry worker who'd helped with other searches before. We set out early in the morning as the blizzard started to pick up again. The snow was falling so heavily that we could barely see a few feet ahead of us. The wind howled through the trees like it was alive, and every step felt like we were walking deeper into something we didn't fully understand. By late afternoon, we found ourselves near an abandoned logging foreman's cabin, a place I'd only seen once before during patrols. Looked even more run down than I remembered, its roof sagging under the weight of snow and its windows frosted over like blind, eyes staring into nothingness. With the storm getting worse by the minute, we decided to take shelter inside until it passed. The cabin smelled musty and damp, like rot and decay had taken over years ago. As we settled in and tried to warm up by lighting an old stove in the corner, Martinez found something strange carved into one of the wooden beams near the foundation. Symbols, Native American in origin, that looked ancient. "What do you think they mean?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," I replied honestly. Jackson found old newspaper clippings stuffed into a drawer in what used to be the foreman's desk. They were yellowed with age but still readable, and they all described similar incidents. Strange disappearances and sightings of something people couldn't explain. "Look at this," Jackson said as he handed me one of the clippings dated 1987, the same year as one of the Dogman sightings mentioned in the journal. As I read through it, my stomach sank. The article described how several hunters had gone missing during a similar blizzard, only for their bodies to be found weeks later arranged in circles with no signs of violence or struggle. "Maybe we should have stayed outside," Wilson muttered nervously as he glanced toward one of the windows. None of us said anything after that. The cabin was supposed to be a safe place, a shelter from the storm. But as the hours passed, it started to feel more like a trap. The wind outside was relentless, battering the walls and windows like it was trying to get in. The stove gave off just enough heat to keep us from freezing, but the air still felt cold, heavy, and wrong. None of us spoke much. We were all on edge, listening to every creak of the old wood and every whistle of the wind, wondering if it was just the storm, or something else. It started with the scratching. At first, it was faint, barely noticeable over the sound of the wind. But then it got louder, more deliberate. It came from the door, then the windows, then the walls. Something was circling us, testing us. Jackson grabbed his rifle and stood by the door, his hands shaking despite his tough guy exterior. "Probably just an animal," he muttered, though he didn't sound convinced. Then came the voices. They were soft at first, almost like whispers carried on the wind. But as they grew louder, we realized what they were. Our loved ones' voices. "Jackson!" A woman's voice called from outside. "It's me. Let me in." Jackson froze, his eyes wide with fear. "That's my wife," he whispered hoarsely. She's back home. Martinez." Another voice called, a child's voice this time. "Mommy, I'm cold. Please." Martinez backed away from the window, her face pale as a ghost. "That's my son," she said shakily. "He's not here. He can't be here." I didn't hear my son's voice, not yet, but I knew what was happening wasn't normal. Whatever was out there wasn't human. It was playing with us, trying to break us down. The glowing blue eyes came next. I saw them first through one of the frosted windows, two bright orbs staring at me from the darkness outside. They weren't just glowing. They were hypnotic, pulling me in like they were reaching into my mind and taking hold of something deep inside me. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe until Martinez shook me hard enough to snap me out of it. "It's out there," she whispered urgently. Jackson wasn't doing well. He started pacing back and forth, mumbling under his breath about how none of us were safe and how we needed to leave before it got inside. Wilson tried to calm him down, but Jackson snapped, grabbing Wilson by the collar and shouting in his face, "You're not real, you're one of them." We had to pull Jackson off him before he did something worse. That's when Martinez screamed. She was standing near one of the back rooms when she saw something through a crack in the door. Something she wouldn't describe except for one word. Impossible. She locked herself inside that room and refused to come out no matter how much we begged her. Wilson lost it after that. "I'm not staying here," he said frantically as he grabbed his coat and headed for the door. "I'd rather take my chances out there than stay in here with whatever this is." I tried to stop him. I really did. But he shoved me aside and ran out into the blizzard before I could grab him. We heard him screaming a few minutes later, and then nothing. Jackson spiraled after that. He grabbed an axe from one of the corners and started swinging it wildly at anything that moved. At me. At Martinez's locked door. Until Martinez burst out with her own weapon. A hunting knife she'd brought with her for protection. She stabbed Jackson in self-defense after he lunged at her, and he went down hard. It was just me and Martinez, now, and whatever was outside. The roof gave way next. Snow poured into the cabin as something heavy landed above us. a shadow too big to be any normal animal. The dogman broke through seconds later, its massive frame filling what was left of the room as its glowing blue eyes locked onto mine. I fired my gun at it again and again, but the bullets didn't do anything except make it angrier. Martinez screamed as it lunged toward her, and I knew I had only one option left. I grabbed one of the lanterns and threw it at the stove, setting everything ablaze in an instant. The fire spread fast, too fast, and I barely managed to make it into the root cellar before the entire cabin went up in flames. Martinez didn't make it out. Her screams echoed through that burning cabin as I crawled through a narrow tunnel, leading back into the forest. I don't know how long I stayed in that root cellar. It felt like hours, but it might have been only minutes. The heat from the fire above was unbearable, and the smoke seeped down into the narrow space, making it harder to breathe. My hands were shaking as I tried to steady myself against the dirt walls. I could still hear Martinez's screams echoing in my ears, even though I knew she was gone. The cabin was completely engulfed in flames now, and the sound of cracking wood and roaring fire drowned out everything else. But then I heard it, the howl. It wasn't like before. This time, it was louder, closer, and filled with something primal, something that made every hair on my body stand on end. The dogman wasn't finished with me yet. I crawled through the tunnel as fast as I could, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The tunnel led out to the edge of the forest where the snowstorm was still raging. The cold hit me, like a slap in the face, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away from that thing. The forest was pitch black except for the faint glow of the fire behind me and the swirling snow all around. My flashlight had died during the chaos, so I had nothing but my instincts to guide me. Every step felt like a struggle as I pushed through knee-deep snow, trying to put as much distance between me and the cabin as possible. But no matter how far I ran, I could feel it watching me. I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't just a feeling. It was like a presence pressing down on me, making it harder to think, harder to breathe. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every sound felt like it was coming from right behind me. And then I saw them, the glowing blue eyes. They appeared in the darkness ahead of me, cutting through the fog like two burning coals. My legs froze, in place as those eyes locked onto mine again, pulling me into their hypnotic stare. It felt like time stopped, like everything around me faded away except for those eyes. I couldn't move, I couldn't even blink, as the dogman stepped closer. Its massive frame towered over me, its fur matted with snow and ash from the fire. Its breath came out in heavy clouds of steam that hung in the air between us, and those claws, those impossibly long claws, looked like they could tear through steel. It didn't attack right away. It just stood there, staring at me with those haunting eyes, almost as if it was studying me, or enjoying my fear. I don't know what came over me in that moment. Maybe it was adrenaline or sheer desperation, but somehow, I managed to break free from its gaze and reach for my last weapon, a flare gun strapped to my belt. I fired without thinking. The flare shot through the air and exploded into a bright red light that lit up the entire forest for a few seconds. The dogman let out an ear-piercing howl and backed away into the shadows, its glowing eyes disappearing into the darkness. I didn't wait to see if it would come back. I ran, blindly stumbling through the snow until I finally found one of the access roads leading back toward base. My lungs burned with every breath, and my legs felt like they were about to give out, but I kept going until I saw the faint glow of headlights in the distance. A rescue team had been sent out after we failed to check in. They found me collapsed, on the side of the road, barely conscious and mumbling incoherently about what had happened. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. My head was pounding, my body felt like it had been through a war, and my throat was raw, probably from inhaling all that smoke. A nurse came in and told me I'd been found hypothermic and barely alive. The rescue team said they didn't find anyone else. No Jackson, no Martinez, no Wilson. Just me. I tried to explain what had happened. to tell them about the Dogman, the glowing eyes, the voices, all of it, but they just looked at me like I'd lost my mind. The official report blamed everything on carbon monoxide poisoning from the old stove in the cabin. They said it caused hallucinations and paranoia, which explained the deaths and my wild story. But I knew better. I knew what I saw, out there wasn't some hallucination or trick of the mind. It was real. And it's still out there, somewhere in those woods, waiting for its next victim. After I was released from the hospital, they put me on administrative leave pending a psychological evaluation. I didn't argue. I didn't have the energy to fight it. Instead, I went back to my small house near the edge of the forest and started digging into every Dogman sighting I could find. The stories were all eerily similar. Strange tracks in the snow, animals found dead in circles, glowing blue eyes in the darkness. They went back decades, maybe even centuries, and always seemed to happen in cycles, every 7 years like clockwork. It's been months since that night, but I can't escape it. Every time I close my eyes, I see those blue eyes staring back at me. Every time the wind howls outside my window, I hear its growl. And then there are the animal deaths. They've started happening near my home now. Deer and rabbits found frozen in perfect circles, just like before. The local authorities brush it off as some kind of natural phenomenon, but I know better. Last week, a local radio station played an anonymous tape someone sent in, a recording of howling that didn't sound like any animal anyone could identify. The host joked about it being Michigan's Bigfoot, but I couldn't laugh, because I know what it really is. I don't go into the forest anymore, not alone anyway. But sometimes at night, when everything is quiet and still, I swear, can feel it watching me from the shadows just beyond the tree line, waiting. My name is Elaine Yazzie. I'm a park ranger and I work in one of the most remote areas of northern Arizona, right in the heart of the Navajo Nation. It's a place called Skinwalker Ridge. The name itself sends chills down the spines of many locals, but for me, it's just another part of the land I grew up on. Or at least that's what I used to tell myself. I'm 34 years old, and I've spent most of my life trying to balance two worlds. The modern world I entered when I went to college and the traditional Navajo culture I was born into. After graduating with a degree in wildlife biology from the University of Arizona, I thought I'd leave this land behind for good, but something kept pulling me back. Maybe it was my heritage, or maybe it was guilt for turning away from my roots. Either way, here I am. Skinwalker Ridge is unlike any other place I've ever been. The mesas rise like ancient guardians over the land, casting shadows so deep that even at midday, you feel like something is hiding in them. The juniper trees twist and bend in strange ways, their branches forming shapes that look like faces, if you stare too long. And then there are the petroglyphs, ancient carvings on the rocks that show figures that are half human, half animal. Nobody knows exactly how old they are, but they've been here for centuries. The nights here are the worst. The temperature drops so fast it feels like you've stepped into another world entirely. A mist rolls in, thick and disorienting, making it hard to see or even think straight. Sounds travel strangely here too. Voices and footsteps echo for miles, even when there's no one around to make them. The locals, the Navajo people who live nearby, refuse to come anywhere near this area after sunset. They say it's cursed, that skinwalkers roam these lands looking for people to prey on. Skinwalkers are shapeshifters, witches who have given up their humanity for dark powers. They can mimic voices perfectly, take the form of animals they've killed, and feed on fear itself. Growing up, my grandmother used to tell me stories about them. She would warn me never to whistle at night and always wear my turquoise pendant for protection. I didn't take her warning seriously back then, but now I'm not so sure. The government has been pushing to develop parts of this land for tourism, hiking trails, campgrounds, even a lodge, but it hasn't gone well. strange things keep happening here. Cattle mutilations on nearby ranches, hikers disappearing without a trace, compasses spinning wildly as if something is interfering with them. Even my truck acts up sometimes when I drive through certain areas. It'll stall out completely for no reason. There's an abandoned trading post from the 1920s that we use as our ranger station now. It's falling apart, but it's all we've got out here. My partner, Ranger Peterson, is a good guy. A bit skeptical about all the stories, but reliable when things get tough. He's been here longer than me and says he's never seen anything unusual. But I can tell he doesn't like being out here after dark either. I keep journals of everything I see. Wildlife patterns, weather changes, even strange occurrences that don't make sense. At first, it was just part of my job as a ranger. But lately, I've been digging deeper into the disappearances and legends surrounding this place. Maybe it's foolish curiosity, or maybe it's because my grandmother always said our family has a connection to these lands. A connection that goes deeper than most people understand. I don't know what I'm looking for exactly, but something tells me Skinwalker Ridge isn't just another patch of wilderness. It started with the coyote. I was out on patrol, walking along one of the trails near the ridge. The sun was high, but the shadows from the mesas stretched long across the ground. It was quiet, too quiet, even for a place like this. No birds chirping, no wind rustling through the juniper trees, just silence. That's when I saw it. A coyote lying in the dirt, perfectly still. At first, I thought it might have been hit by a car or maybe killed by another animal. But as I got closer, I realized something was very wrong. Its body had been arranged. Its legs stretched out in a strange pattern, almost like it was pointing in 4 directions. Its organs were missing, and its fur looked like it had been carefully peeled back in places. I froze. This wasn't natural. This wasn't an accident. I felt my stomach turn as I crouched down to get a better look. The dirt around the coyote was disturbed, like someone, or something, had been moving around it recently. There were marks in the ground that looked almost like claw prints, but they weren't shaped like any animal I'd ever seen before. They were too big and too human. I took a deep breath and stepped back. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head. Don't touch anything that feels wrong. She used to say that when she told me stories about skinwalkers and their rituals. I didn't believe her back then, but standing there, staring at that mutilated coyote, I wasn't so sure anymore. I radioed Peterson to let him know what I'd found. He told me to mark the location and come back to the station. We could check it out together later. But as I walked back to my truck, something felt off. The air around me felt heavier, like it was pressing down on my shoulders. The silence was so deep it made my ears ring. When I reached my truck, I climbed in and turned the key. Nothing happened. The engine didn't even try to start. It was completely dead. My truck had been acting up lately, but this was different. It wasn't just a mechanical problem. It felt like something didn't want me to leave. I grabbed my gear and decided to hike back to the station instead of waiting around for help. It wasn't far, just a couple of miles, but as soon as I started walking, the mist rolled in. It came out of nowhere, thick and cold, wrapping around me like a blanket. I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, and every sound seemed louder than usual. My boots crunching on gravel, my breathing echoing in my ears. Then I saw them. The symbols carved into the trees. At first, I thought they were just scratches, from animals or weather damage. But as I looked closer, I realized they were deliberate. Lines and shapes that formed patterns too precise to be random. They looked familiar somehow, like something I'd seen in one of my grandmother's old stories or maybe on those ancient petroglyphs near the ridge. I reached out to touch one of the carvings, but stopped myself just in time. My grandmother always said symbols like these carried power, good or bad, and you shouldn't mess with them unless you knew what you were doing. The mist grew thicker as I kept walking, and that's when I heard it. A voice calling my name. Elaine. It was soft at first, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. but then it grew louder and clearer. "Elaine, help me." I froze in place. It sounded exactly like my mother's voice, the same tone she used when she called me inside for dinner as a kid or comforted me after a bad dream. But my mother wasn't here. She was hundreds of miles away at home. The voice came again. "Elaine, please." It was coming from somewhere ahead of me, from a dark ravine that cut through the side of the ridge like a scar. Every instinct told me not to go near it, but something about that voice pulled at me. It felt so real. I took one step toward the ravine, then another. But before I got any closer, I remembered something my grandmother used to say. Skinwalkers can mimic voices perfectly. They'll use your loved ones against you. My heart pounded as I backed away from the ravine slowly, keeping my eyes on it the whole time. The voice kept calling out to me, sounding more desperate with every word. "Elaine, don't leave me." But I didn't stop moving until I was far enough away that the mist swallowed up everything behind me, including that voice. By the time I made it back to camp near the ranger station, night had fallen completely. My truck still wouldn't start, so I set up my tent and tried to calm myself down with some tea from my thermos. But even inside my tent with all my gear around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching me. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little sound outside my tent made me jump. The rustling of leaves, the distant howl of a coyote, even the creaking of the old juniper trees. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I could feel it in my gut. By morning, I was exhausted but determined to figure out what was going on. Peterson radioed me early saying he'd spotted strange lights near the ridge overnight. He sounded calm, but I could hear the unease in his voice. "I'm going to check it out," he said. "You stay put until your truck's working." I didn't argue. I wasn't ready to go back to the ridge yet, not after what happened yesterday. A few hours later, I tried radioing Peterson to see if he'd found anything. Static. I tried again. More static. Then, faintly, I heard something. Chanting. It was low and rhythmic, like a drumbeat made of words. It didn't sound like Peterson at all. "Peterson, are you there?" I asked, my voice shaking. No response. I grabbed my gear and headed toward the ridge to find him. The mist had cleared by now, and the sun was bright overhead, but the air still felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me with every step. As I got closer to the ridge, I noticed something strange. My footprints from yesterday were still there, circling back toward my camp. But here's the thing. I hadn't walked in circles yesterday. At least, not that I remembered. The sight sent a chill down my spine. It felt like someone, or something, was playing tricks on me. When I reached the area where Peterson said he'd seen the lights, I found his uniform lying on the ground. It was perfectly intact. His boots were still laced, his jacket zipped up, but there was no sign of him anywhere. It was like he'd just vanished into thin air. "Peterson," I called out, my voice echoing through the canyon. Nothing. I picked up his radio and tried calling him. Again. More static, and then that chanting sound returned, louder this time. It felt like it was coming from all around me, bouncing off the rock walls and twisting in ways that didn't make sense. My hands were shaking as I backed away from his uniform and scanned the area for any sign of him. That's when I noticed something else. Symbols drawn in the dirt around where his uniform lay. They looked like the ones carved into the trees yesterday, but fresher, like they'd been made just moments ago. I didn't touch them. Instead, I turned and ran back toward camp as fast as I could. When I got there, everything seemed normal at first. My tent was still standing, my gear untouched. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Symbols had been drawn. In the dirt around my camp, too. Protective symbols, the kind my grandmother used to teach me about when she told stories of skinwalkers. It was like someone, or something, was trying to keep me safe, or trap me here. That night, I dreamed about my grandmother for the first time in years. She was sitting by a fire in her old house, humming softly and weaving a blanket with patterns that looked like those symbols in the dirt. "You need to listen," she said without looking up at me. "Listen to what?" I asked. "To them," she replied. "But don't let them trick you." Before I could ask her what she meant, she reached out and touched my turquoise pendant, the one she gave me when I was a little girl, and whispered something in Navajo that I couldn't quite understand. When I woke up, her voice was still echoing in my head. "Don't let them trick you." The next night was worse than the last. I felt like the air around me was alive, pressing in closer with every passing hour. Even inside my tent, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I tried to focus on my grandmother's words from the dream, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Peterson. Where was he? What had happened to him? I didn't have to wait long for answers. It started with the sounds. Rustling outside my tent, soft at first, then louder. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent slowly, trying not to make a sound. The beam of light cut through the darkness, and that's when I saw them. Animals. They were standing in a loose circle around my camp. Coyote, eagle, bear, all staring straight at me. But their eyes weren't normal. They were human, deep, dark, and filled with something I couldn't explain. Fear, anger, hunger. Whatever it was, it made my skin crawl. Then they spoke. "Elaine." The voice came from the coyote first, but it wasn't its voice, it was Peterson's. "Help me." I stumbled back into my tent, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the voices kept coming. The eagle spoke next, its beak moving in ways that shouldn't have been possible. "Elaine, why did you leave me?" Then the bear. "Elaine, we know who you are." I clutched my grandmother's turquoise pendant tightly, trying to steady my breathing. My mind raced as I remembered her stories about skinwalkers, how they could take the form of animals they'd killed and mimic human voices perfectly. "You're not real," I whispered to myself. "You're not real." But then a deer stepped forward from the shadows, its movements slow and deliberate. Its eyes were human, too, dark and piercing, and its voice was calm as it spoke. "We've been collecting people for generations, Elaine. Your friend is with us now." I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The deer tilted its head and took another step closer. "We know your family," it said softly. "Your grandmother tried to warn you, but you didn't listen." My hands shook as I reached for the medicine bundle in my pack, the one my grandmother gave me years ago but I'd never used before. Inside were herbs she said could protect against evil spirits: sage, cedar, and a small pouch of pollen. The animals circled closer, their voices blending together into a chorus of whispers and pleas. "Join us. You don't have to be afraid. We can give you power." I remembered what my grandmother said in the dream. "Don't let them trick you." Using what little courage I had left, I grabbed the herbs and began sprinkling them around me in a circle while whispering a prayer she taught me as a child. My voice shook as I spoke the words in Navajo, but I kept going. The animals stopped moving for a moment, watching me carefully. Then they began to change. Their bodies twisted and stretched unnaturally, legs bending backward, fur melting into skin, as they transformed into half-human shapes. Their faces were distorted versions of people I knew. Peterson's face on the coyote's body, my grandfather's face on the bear, even my mother's face on the eagle. "Elaine," they whispered again, their voices growing louder and more desperate. "You can still join us." Tears streamed down my face as I finished the prayer and closed the protective circle with pollen. The air around me seemed to shift, lighter somehow, and the creatures screamed in unison as if they were being burned by an invisible fire. The mist rolled in again just as dawn broke over the ridge, and when the sunlight touched the ground, they vanished. leaving nothing behind but silence. The morning light felt like a lifeline, cutting through the mist and pushing away the darkness. I sat there in the dirt, clutching my grandmother's pendant and staring at the empty space where the creatures had been. My hands were still shaking and my throat was dry, but I was alive. Somehow, I had survived. I didn't know what to do next. Peterson was gone. There was no trace of him except for his uniform still lying on the ridge like a hollow shell. I thought about going back to look for him, but deep down, I knew it was pointless. Whatever had taken him wasn't something I could fight or reason with. He was gone. When I finally got my truck working later that day, I drove straight to the ranger station and told my supervisor everything, or at least most of it. I left out the parts about skinwalkers and voices in the mist. Instead, I said Peterson had gone missing while investigating strange lights near the ridge. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. I knew they wouldn't believe me if I told them what really happened. The authorities launched a search for Peterson, but after weeks of combing the area, they found nothing, not even footprints. Eventually, he was officially listed as missing in the wilderness, and the case was closed. I convinced them to shut down that section of the park using environmental concerns as an excuse. It wasn't much, but it was all I could do to keep people away from Skinwalker Ridge. The locals didn't need convincing. They already knew better than to go near that place. Back at home, I tried to move on, but it wasn't easy. Every night I felt like something was watching me, just out of sight but close enough to make my skin crawl. Sometimes I'd hear strange sounds outside my window, scratching on the walls or soft whispers that sounded almost like my name. I started keeping my grandmother's protective herbs with me at all times, sage in my pockets, cedar under my pillow, and wearing her pendant. Constantly. It helped a little, but the fear never really went away. Eventually, I transferred to another park far from Skinwalker Ridge. It was quieter there, safer, but even then, strange things followed me. Animals would appear near my cabin at night. Coyotes, with human-like eyes or birds that seemed to watch me too closely. Once, I found symbols drawn in the dirt outside my door, the same ones I'd seen near my camp on the ridge. I knew then that this wasn't over. Whatever had happened at Skinwalker Ridge had marked me somehow, and there was no escaping it. Over time, I started researching similar incidents across Navajo lands, disappearances, mutilations, strange sightings, and connecting with others who'd experienced them firsthand. Some were traditional healers, others were just people like me who'd seen things they couldn't explain. Together, we formed a quiet network to monitor skinwalker activity and share protective rituals. My journals became more detailed as I pieced together patterns and locations where these events happened most often. By the time 20 years had passed, those journals were filled with maps marked in traditional Navajo symbols, coordinates of places to avoid, and warnings for anyone who might wander too close. Skinwalker Ridge stayed closed all those years, but even then, people whispered about it, about hikers who ignored warnings and never came back, or ranchers who found their cattle mutilated in ways that didn't make sense. And then, one day, I'll never forget this, a young ranger called me out of nowhere. He said he'd been assigned to Skinwalker Ridge recently and had found one of my old journals in a storage box at the station. "There's something happening here," he said quietly. "Something bad." I didn't ask him for details. I already knew what he meant. My name is Veronica Mitchell, but everyone calls me Ronnie. I'm a park ranger at Olympic National Park in Washington, and my job usually involves keeping hikers safe, monitoring wildlife, and making sure nature stays undisturbed. But lately, my work has taken me to Echo Lake, a place that feels anything but natural. Echo Lake is beautiful at first glance. It's tucked between towering mountains with water so clear it reflects the sky like a mirror. The old-growth forest surrounding the lake is full of massive cedar and hemlock trees that make you feel like you've stepped into a cathedral. The air smells fresh, like wildflowers and damp earth after a rainstorm. Sometimes you'll see trout jumping out of the water, creating ripples that spread across the still surface. But there's something about Echo Lake that doesn't sit right with me. It's unusually deep, so deep that the center turns pitch black, even on sunny days. In the mornings, mist rises from the water and floats like ghostly shapes, twisting and turning as if they're alive. The mountains surrounding the lake act like a natural amphitheater, making sounds echo strangely. Even a bird's chirp can sound eerie here. I've been working at Echo Lake for weeks now, investigating some strange disappearances in the area. Hikers have gone missing without a trace, leaving behind their gear as if they just vanished into thin air. Locals whisper about legends tied to the lake, stories about water spirits or monsters, but I don't believe in that kind of stuff. I'm a scientist at heart, and I know there's always a logical explanation for things. Still, I can't shake this feeling of heaviness in the air when I'm near the lake. It's like something is watching me, something from beneath the surface. I've set up a small monitoring station near the shoreline to collect water samples and study the lake's ecosystem. But even my equipment is picking up things I can't explain, oxygen levels that fluctuate wildly and organic compounds I've never seen before. And then there are the cold spots, patches of freezing water that seem to move around randomly even though it's summer. The other day, I saw something strange along the muddy shoreline. Tracks. Wide, webbed impressions that don't match any animal I know of. They were too big for otters or beavers and spaced far apart, as if whatever made them was walking on 2 legs instead of 4. I've tried to stay focused on my work, but Echo Lake has started to creep into my dreams. Every night I wake up gasping for air, haunted by visions of drowning in its dark waters. I don't know what's going on here yet, but I'm determined to find out. My name is Veronica Mitchell, but you already know that. What you might not know is why I'm here at Echo Lake, chasing answers that no one else seems to want. I wasn't always a park ranger. Before this, I was a marine biologist. I spent years studying underwater ecosystems, diving into the depths of oceans and lakes to uncover their secrets. But that all changed after my last dive, a dive that nearly killed me. It happened 3 years ago off the coast of California. I was studying deep-sea creatures when something went wrong with my equipment. My oxygen tank malfunctioned, and I was trapped underwater, unable to breathe. I don't remember much about those moments, except the panic, the feeling of my chest burning, and my mind screaming for air. Somehow, I survived, but the experience left its mark on me. Literally. There's a scar on my shoulder from where they had to cut away my diving gear to save me. After that, I couldn't go back to marine biology. The thought of diving again made my stomach turn. So I changed careers and became a park ranger, a job that kept me on land, where I felt safe. Or at least safer than I do now. You see, Echo Lake reminds me of that dive in ways I can't explain. The depth of the water, the way it seems alive, it's like the lake is pulling me back to that moment when I almost drowned. And yet, I can't stay away from it. Maybe it's because I'm stubborn, or maybe it's because I need answers. Answers about what's happening here and why people are disappearing. I've been working alone for most of this investigation, though my supervisor doesn't like it. He thinks I take too many risks, like setting up my monitoring station right next to the lake or diving into the shallows to collect samples without backup. He doesn't understand why this matters so much to me. But it does matter. It matters. Because Echo Lake isn't just a mystery. It's a puzzle waiting to be solved. The anomalies in the water samples, the strange tracks on the shore, they're clues pointing to something bigger. Something no one else has seen yet. I carry a worn copy of Moby Dick in my backpack wherever I go. A reminder of how obsession can drive people to do crazy things. Sometimes I wonder if this lake is my white whale, if chasing its secrets will lead me somewhere dangerous. But then I shake off those thoughts and focus on the facts, the science, and tell myself that everything has an explanation if you look hard enough. Still, there are moments when doubt creeps in, like when hikers tell me they've heard voices coming from the water, or when my radio picks up garbled transmissions that sound like people speaking backward. And then there are my nightmares, the ones where I'm drowning again, sinking into Echo Lake's dark depths while something watches me from below. I don't know what's waiting for me in this lake, but whatever it is, it feels ancient and patient, like it's been here long before any of us and will remain long after we're gone. The first real warning sign came on a quiet morning. The sun was just rising, casting a golden glow over the lake. I was sitting by my monitoring station, going over the latest water samples. At first, everything seemed normal. pH levels, temperature, the usual stuff. But then I noticed something strange. The oxygen levels in the water were all over the place. One sample showed almost no oxygen, like the water was suffocating, while another sample taken just a few feet away had levels so high it didn't make sense. I thought maybe my equipment was malfunctioning, so I tested it again. Same results. Then there were the organic compounds, something I couldn't identify. It wasn't algae or bacteria or anything I'd seen before. It looked almost synthetic, like it didn't belong in nature. That same day, I decided to take a closer look at the lake itself. I brought my underwater thermometer and waded into the shallows. The water was cold, not unusual for a mountain lake, but as I moved further out, I felt sudden patches of freezing water, so cold it made my skin ache. These cold spots weren't natural. They felt deliberate, like something was moving them around. Later that afternoon, while walking along the shoreline, I found more tracks in the mud, those same wide, webbed impressions I'd seen before. Only this time, there were more of them, and they led straight into the water. Whatever made those tracks wasn't just passing through, it was in the lake now. Things started escalating after that. My underwater camera picked up something I couldn't explain. Strange patterns of light moving deep below the surface. They glowed faintly, like bioluminescence, but they didn't behave like any natural phenomenon I'd studied before. The lights twisted and pulsed in rhythmic patterns, almost like they were alive, or trying to communicate. The locals started reporting even stranger things. A group of hikers claimed they heard voices coming from the lake, faint whispers calling their names. One man swore he heard his wife's voice, even though she wasn't with him that day. Another hiker said he saw perfectly circular ripples forming in the middle of the lake when there wasn't any wind or movement to cause them. And then there was the dog, a search and rescue dog brought in to help look for one of the missing hikers. The dog refused to go near the water. It growled and barked at the lake like it was trying to protect its handler from something invisible. When they tried to force it closer, it went wild, snapping at its leash and whining like it was terrified. That night, something happened that shook me to my core. I was sitting in my monitoring station when my radio crackled to life. At first, it sounded like static, but then I heard voices, distorted and faint, like they were coming from far away. The words didn't make sense. They sounded backward, or scrambled, but one thing was clear. It wasn't random noise. I barely slept that night. When I woke up early the next morning and stepped outside, I saw that the water level had risen overnight, several feet higher than it had been before. My monitoring station was partially flooded, even though there hadn't been any rain. I stood there for a long time, staring at those still waters and wondering what kind of force could cause a lake to rise on its own. Whatever was happening here wasn't just a coincidence anymore. It felt deliberate, as if something beneath the surface wanted me to notice it. I knew I couldn't avoid diving into the lake forever. The shallow water wasn't giving me enough answers, and the strange things happening around Echo Lake were growing more intense by the day. If I wanted to understand what was going on, I had to go deeper. I waited until midday, when the sun was high and the mist had burned off the surface. The lake looked calm, almost inviting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me below. I suited up with my diving gear, double-checked my oxygen tank, and strapped on my underwater camera. My supervisor, Kevin Torres, insisted on coming with me. He wasn't a diver like me, but he was a good park ranger and didn't want me going in alone. As we waded into the water, I felt that familiar chill, the freezing patches that seemed to move around like invisible currents. Kevin noticed it too. He shivered and muttered something about how unnatural it felt. We descended slowly, the sunlight filtering through the water in shimmering beams. At first, everything seemed normal. Rocks, plants, and fish darting around us. But as we went deeper, the fish disappeared entirely and the water grew darker and colder. Then I saw it. The lights. Those faint bioluminescent patterns I'd captured on camera before were now right in front of me. They pulsed gently, swirling in strange shapes that didn't seem random. It was mesmerizing, but also deeply unsettling, like they were alive and watching us. I signaled to Kevin to stay close as we moved toward the lights. That's when I felt it, a vibration in my chest, low and deep, like a hum that wasn't coming from my equipment or the water around us. It was coming from below. I turned my camera downward and froze. Something massive was moving in the depths beneath us, a pale shape that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. At first, I thought it was a rock formation or a trick of the light, but then it moved again, slow and deliberate. The creature was serpentine in shape, but unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It had multiple appendages that shifted between solid and liquid states, almost like they were phasing in and out of existence. Its skin was translucent, revealing strange organs inside that pulsed with light. Kevin grabbed my arm suddenly, his eyes wide with panic. He pointed toward one of its appendages. It was moving toward us. I tried to signal him to stay calm, but before I could react, one of those tentacle-like limbs shot forward and wrapped around him. It wasn't solid. It felt like water, but held him tightly all the same. Kevin struggled against it, his movements frantic as he tried to break free. I swam toward him, grabbing at the appendage with both hands, but it burned my skin on contact, a sharp sting that made me let go immediately. The creature began pulling Kevin downward into the depths. His eyes met mine for one last moment before he disappeared into the darkness. I wanted to go after him. I really did. But my oxygen tank was running low, and if I stayed any longer, I'd risk drowning myself. I surfaced as quickly as I could, gasping for air as I broke through the water's surface. The lake looked different now, darker somehow, and the shoreline seemed farther away than it had been before. When I finally reached land, I collapsed onto the ground, shaking from head to toe. Kevin was gone, taken by something I couldn't even begin to understand. And yet, I knew this wasn't over. The creature hadn't just taken Kevin, it had shown itself deliberately, like it wanted me to see it. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just some unknown species. It was intelligent. I couldn't stop thinking about Kevin. I replayed the moment he was taken over and over in my mind, wondering if there was something I could have done to save him. But deep down, I knew the truth. Whatever that thing was, it was far beyond anything I could fight with my bare hands. I spent the next day combing through my equipment, trying to figure out what went wrong. My camera had captured glimpses of the creature, but the footage was blurry and distorted, almost like the thing didn't want to be seen clearly. My underwater thermometer showed wild temperature spikes during the dive, and my audio recorder picked up faint humming sounds that matched the vibrations I'd felt in my chest. I realized then that the creature wasn't just surviving an Echo Lake, it was controlling it. The cold spots, the rising water levels, even the strange ripples on the surface. It was all connected to this thing. I knew I had to go back into the lake, but this time, I wouldn't go unprepared. Using what little equipment I had left, rigged a makeshift sonic device, a small speaker system capable of emitting high-frequency sounds. Based on my research, certain sound frequencies could disrupt aquatic creatures' behavior, even drive them away. It wasn't much, but it was my only chance. That night, as a storm rolled in over the mountains, I stood at the edge of Echo Lake with my gear strapped to my back. The wind whipped through the trees, and thunder rumbled in the distance. The lake's surface looked calm, but I knew better now. I waded into the water slowly, feeling that familiar chill as I moved deeper. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned on my sonic device and lowered it into the water. For a moment, nothing happened. The lake remained still, and all I could hear was the sound of rain hitting the surface. But then, the hum started again, low and deep, vibrating through my chest like a warning. The water around me began to ripple in perfect circles, moving outward from a single point in the center of the lake. And then it rose. The creature broke through, the surface like a living nightmare, its pale body twisting and coiling as it towered above me. Its translucent skin glowed faintly in the darkness, revealing those strange organs pulsing inside. Tentacle-like appendages reached out toward me, shifting between solid and liquid states as they moved. It wasn't just massive, it was ancient. Everything about it felt old, like it had been here long before humans ever set foot on this land. The creature let out a sound, a low-frequency hum so powerful it made my ears ring and my vision blur. It wasn't just noise, it was communication. It wanted me to understand something, or maybe it wanted me to feel its anger. I hit the switch on my sonic device and prayed it would work. The high-frequency sound blasted through the water, cutting through the hum like a knife. The creature recoiled instantly, its appendages thrashing, as if in pain. The water churned violently around me as it tried to retreat back into the depths, but then it turned its attention toward me. One of its tentacles shot forward, wrapping around my leg and pulling me under. The cold was unbearable, like ice stabbing into every inch of my skin, and I struggled against its grip with everything I had. My oxygen tank cracked during the struggle, leaking precious air into the water around me. I knew I didn't have much time left. With one final burst of strength, I grabbed a rock from the lake bed and slammed it against my sonic device's control panel. The frequency shifted higher, so high it felt like needles piercing my ears, and the creature let out a deafening roar that echoed through the mountains. Its grip loosened just enough for me to break free and swim toward the surface. When I finally reached land, I collapsed onto the shoreline, gasping for air as rain poured down around me. The lake churned violently behind me as if in protest before finally going still. The creature had retreated, for now, but I knew this wasn't over. The storm passed by mourning, but Echo Lake didn't look the same anymore. The water level had dropped dramatically overnight, exposing parts of the lake bed that hadn't seen sunlight in who knows how long. I stood there on the shore, staring at what the receding water had revealed. Bones, hundreds of them, scattered across the muddy ground, like a graveyard that had been hidden for centuries. Some were human, skulls, ribs, femurs, but others belonged to animals I couldn't even identify. Whatever that creature was, it had been feeding here for generations, pulling its victims into the depths and leaving nothing behind but their remains. I called for backup immediately. Within hours, the area was swarming with park rangers, police, and even a team of archaeologists. They started cataloging the remains, trying to piece together how far back this went. Some of the bones were recent, likely belonging to the hikers who disappeared in the past few months, but others were ancient, dating back hundreds of years. One of the archaeologists mentioned something about local legends, stories from native tribes about a water spirit that lived in deep lakes and lured people to their deaths. They said it could move between bodies of water through underground channels, disappearing from one lake only to reappear in another. That thought chilled me to my core. If this thing could move between lakes, then draining Echo Lake wouldn't stop it. It would just find somewhere else to hide. The authorities decided to drain Echo Lake anyway, filling it with concrete to make sure no one else could fall victim. to whatever was lurking there. It felt like a hollow victory, though. Even as I watched the lake slowly disappear, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't truly stopped it. And then there was me. Ever since that night in the lake, something's been different. When I'm near water now, any water, I hear things. Whispers, faint and distant, like voices carried on the wind. Sometimes they're crying, sometimes they're screaming, and sometimes they're calling my name. I don't know if it's some kind of trauma from what happened or if that creature left a mark on me somehow. A connection I can't break. All I know is that I can't escape it. A few weeks after Echo Lake was drained, I started digging through old records, newspaper clippings, historical accounts, anything I could find, about similar disappearances or strange phenomena near lakes and rivers. The patterns were there if you looked closely enough. Clusters of vanishings near deep bodies of water, always accompanied by whispers of a monster or spirit in the depths. And then I found something that made my blood run cold. Reports of strange ripple patterns forming off the coast of Puget Sound, ripples that moved in perfect circles. I stood on the shore of Puget Sound yesterday, watching those ripples form far out in the water. The same hum I'd felt in Echo Lake vibrated, faintly in my chest as I stared into the endless blue expanse. It's out there somewhere, waiting, and I think it knows I'm watching.